If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 87, A Bad Feeling. The facility tour turned out to be disappointing. Most of the buildings were classified. Ryan couldn't take Chloe through the drift lab, the weapons facility, or the hangar where Scrapper was stored. Even getting her onto the radar station's residential grounds had required Patricia's sign off. Ryan understood the difference between the things he could be bold about and the things he couldn't. This didn't bother Chloe in the slightest. The cafeteria had fried chicken. She'd ordered 2 drumsticks. Then a third. Then a fourth. She was on her 5th now, braised in soy sauce, eating with the serene focus of someone who had prioritized her life correctly. So much for training, Ryan observed. I'll run twice tomorrow. Ryan had arranged a guest room in the residential block next to his own quarters. After dinner, Chloe showered and came over with her laptop, settling onto Ryan's bed to edit the day's footage. Ryan was at his desk, deep in the Crimson Typhoon damper system research. His work area was covered in handwritten sheets, equations, diagrams, stress calculations, mechanical flow derivations. His laptop displayed a rotating selection of published papers on vibration damping, magnetorheological fluid dynamics, and aerospace shock isolation. Patricia's office had pulled the materials for him, pre-sorted and categorized. "Yeah, I definitely can't read any of this," Chloe said, leaning over his shoulder. Her hair fell forward, smelling like whatever shampoo she'd used in the shower. Ryan didn't look up from his page. "You've never been able to read anything I read." "Rude." "Accurate." "I'm going to edit your videos so you look ugly." "I'm not in the video." "I'll edit you in. And then make you look ugly." She flopped onto the bed and started working. Ryan went back to his derivation. The room settled into quiet. Keys clicking on her laptop. Ryan's pen moving across paper. Occasionally the sound of Ryan making a small annotation or Chloe muttering at a difficult cut. On the page, equations and numbers. In Ryan's mind, a fully 3-dimensional simulation of the Crimson Typhoon damper system in operation. Every joint, every valve, every pressure response. The mech running in his imagination, each footfall generating a shock wave, each shock wave absorbed, redistributed, and dissipated through the layered damping architecture. He could see it like a high-speed camera recording. Every movement. Every internal reaction. Every detail. Someday, the system's data on this technology would be public. The industries it would transform would reshape engineering, aerospace, earthquake mitigation, precision manufacturing. People would win lifetime achievement awards understanding a fraction of what Ryan was studying tonight. For now, he was its only reader. An hour later, Chloe finished her edit. Her version of the test video was clean, professional, and unmistakably hers. Multiple angles cut together with deliberate pacing. The moment of first finger movement isolated, centered, given room to breathe. Grant's reactions captured without intrusion. The technology showcased without narration, letting the images carry the message. She titled it. A few minor improvements to the prosthetic. Upload. Post. Done. She lay back on Ryan's bed and started scrolling through the news feed on her phone while the upload processed. Angel will save humanity. Helios Group announces prosthetic launch. Domestic sci-fi film Metro Canon delivers strong performances. Neither caught her attention. She scrolled to Ryan's account to check the comments section, hoping for fresh troll activity she could enjoy with a drumstick. But the trolls were gone. The coordinated negativity that had dominated Ryan's comments for weeks had evaporated overnight. Chloe scrolled down, confused. Were the troll farms on break? Instead, the comments were back to their usual mixture of fan enthusiasm and cinematic commentary. Based on the first frame of this video, I can confirm that one cameraman has officially gained employment in this country. This is actively training high-skill creative labor. You don't understand economics like I do. The previous cameraman has been fired. Thrown in a pot with squid. Tastes great. Stir-fried squid, $3 a pop, 3 for 10. Hope the previous cameraman is okay. Hand over candle for remembrance. How do we know the old cameraman was fired? Maybe they just went back to their network job. Chloe laughed out loud. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, confused, then went back to his equations. Further down, past the cameraman jokes, the actual technology discussion. A few minor improvements is putting it mildly. I can't find a single part that looks the same as the first prototype. Confident language. Drop the I can't find. Nothing is the same. This looks comparable to the international benchmark now. Too bad Ryan never narrates, so we're all just guessing. Looked at the hand. No sensors on the palm, so probably no tactile feedback. But everything else is elite. The video climbed the trending list at the same exponential rate as all of Ryan's previous uploads. Within an hour, it was the top trend on 3 major platforms. 3,000 miles away, Dr. James Alcott was preparing for bed when his phone lit up. His assistant, calling late. Never a good sign. He posted another video. Ryan Mercer. Another test. It looks significantly more advanced than the first one. Alcott groaned. He'd been hoping to get a full night's sleep. I'll look at it now. He pulled up the video on his tablet. Started watching. Grant's face. Danny beside him. The new prosthetic on its stand. And then Alcott's attention locked on something that shouldn't have been there. The sensor cap. He paused the video and zoomed in. The device on Grant's head was clearly an active neural interface, connected by cables to the signal converter and then to the prosthetic. It was reading brain activity directly. That wasn't how Alcott's technology worked. Neuropath's prosthetics, like Whitfield's at Harvard, used targeted muscle reinnervation. A surgical procedure that transplanted nerves from the amputated limb to intact muscle tissue in the residual limb. The transplanted nerves produced clear electrical signals at the skin surface, which a ring-shaped sensor on the residual limb could read reliably. That was the entire industry standard. Surgery, then a localized sensor on the remaining limb. Clean signals because the nerves had been strategically positioned to generate them. But Ryan Mercer's setup put the sensor on the user's head. Directly on the scalp. Reading signals from the cerebral cortex without surgical intervention. That was impossible. Or should have been. Non-invasive cortical signal acquisition was the holy grail of BCI research. Every major institution had been working on it for decades. Every one of them had hit the same wall. The signals from outside the skull were too noisy, too diffuse, and too low resolution to support reliable motor control. You could read intention at a coarse level. You couldn't decode individual finger movements. And yet, on the video Alcott was watching, Grant was controlling individual finger movements. Through a sensor cap. No surgery. No surface electrodes on the limb. No targeted muscle reinnervation. Alcott paused the video and tried to find a shot of Grant's residual limb to confirm there wasn't some additional sensor he'd missed. Grant was wearing a long-sleeved shirt. The empty sleeve hung at his side. No visible sensor on the limb. No visible sensor anywhere except the cap on his head. Alcott felt a cold feeling settle into his stomach. This might be a problem, he said aloud. His assistant, still on the phone, waited. This might be a very big problem. Chapter 88, Birthday and Bootlegs. The video crossed the Pacific at internet speed. Mirror uploads to foreign platforms required no translation, no subtitling, no localization. Just a cache, a share, and the global audience took over. By morning, the same discussions that had erupted on domestic platforms were unfolding on international sites, with slightly different memes and identical conclusions. Among the viewers that morning, Professor Andrew Whitfield, at his desk, coffee cold, calendar full. He'd just finished a call with Michael Reeve discussing Angel's technical rollout schedule. He'd hung up, leaned back, and seen the push notification for Ryan Mercer's new upload. Whitfield watched the video twice. The footage was clean now. Professional editing. Multiple camera angles. No more classified grade cinematography. Someone competent had taken over production, and whoever it was had made sure the critical moments were captured in focus. And in focus, on the volunteer's head, was a sensor cap. A neural interface mounted externally on the scalp. Whitfield's stomach did the same thing Alcott's had done the night before. The same cold recognition. The same unwelcome implication. He didn't have 90% certainty. He had 100. Ryan Mercer's prosthetic was not reading signals from a surgically modified residual limb. It was reading signals directly from the cerebral cortex through a non-invasive surface sensor. That wasn't an incremental improvement. That was a different technology category entirely. Whitfield's entire research program was predicated on targeted muscle reinnervation because non-invasive cortical acquisition at motor control resolution was considered impossible. If it wasn't impossible, if Ryan Mercer had actually solved it, then Whitfield's technology wasn't just facing competition. It was facing extinction. He called Reeve immediately. Reeve picked up on the second ring. His voice was casual, unbothered. Andrew. What's going on? The new video. Have you seen it? My team sent me the summary this morning. Better production values, same technology, nothing to worry about. Michael, it's not the same technology. A pause. Meaning? I believe he's using non-invasive cortical signal acquisition. The sensor is on the user's scalp, not on the residual limb. There's no indication of a surgical modification. Another pause. Longer this time. Non-invasive, you said? Yes. No surgery required. That's what the video appears to show. Reeve's response came with the deliberate calm of a man who was processing information and choosing not to react emotionally. Andrew, I don't know what technology he's using, and honestly, I don't care. What I care about is whether his approach has practical advantages over ours. You're the expert. You tell me. Whitfield measured his words. Theoretically, if his technology works as the video suggests, it has one massive advantage: no surgery. Users don't need to undergo any medical procedure. They put on a cap and operate a prosthetic. That's the entire interface. And the disadvantages. The signal from outside the skull is noisier and lower resolution than the signal from transplanted nerves. In principle, his system should be slower, less precise, and more susceptible to interference. The trade-off is speed versus accessibility. Reeve digested this. So he's shipping an inferior product that's easier to use. That's one way to frame it. Then we have nothing to worry about. We have a superior product backed by a billion-dollar brand campaign. He has a toy that anyone can wear. Our market is people who want the best prosthetic available. His market is people who can't afford ours. Those aren't the same customers. Whitfield wanted to agree. He couldn't. Michael. The addressable market for a prosthetic that requires surgery is a few thousand people per year in premium markets. The addressable market for a prosthetic that anyone can wear is every amputee on Earth. If his product delivers even 70% of our functionality at a tenth of our price with no medical intervention, we don't have a customer base. We have a niche. The line was quiet. Reeve's voice, when it returned, had cooled slightly. I appreciate the analysis, Andrew. My team will evaluate the intelligence on their technical approach. In the meantime, continue as planned. Angel launches on schedule. We'll adjust our positioning if we need to. Michael, this is serious. I understand the stakes. Let me handle the strategic response. You handle the science. Reeve hung up. Whitfield sat in his office, phone in his hand, looking at the image of the sensor cap on his tablet screen. His lab. His life's work. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Dozens of graduate students' dissertations. Thousands of hours of surgical training for the practitioners who would install the nerve transplants. All of it built on the assumption that external cortical acquisition was impossible. If that assumption was wrong, it wasn't just his product that was in trouble. It was his entire research tradition. Every paper citing the impossibility of non-invasive motor decoding was now part of the historical record rather than the current literature. Every surgeon trained in targeted muscle reinnervation had just had their specialty partially obsoleted. And somewhere on the other side of the world, a teenager was probably eating breakfast and thinking about something else entirely. That teenager was, in fact, thinking about something else. Ryan woke up feeling refreshed. He'd slept 8 solid hours, a luxury he hadn't experienced in months. The Crimson Typhoon damper research had reached a good stopping point before bed. The plasma cannon disassembly was proceeding without his input. The drift team was training pilots without his oversight. He checked the system before getting out of bed. Project 2, 82%. 3% gain overnight from the video release. Not bad. The trolls had been shut down, Patricia, obviously, which meant the domestic surge had tapered, but the international audience more than made up for it. People around the world were posting, commenting, debating, analyzing. Every mention fed the system. He wished he could pay the trolls directly. If the system had allowed it, he'd have kept them on retainer. Ryan. Get up. Chloe was kicking his door. He opened it without brushing his teeth. She was standing in the hallway holding a square gift box, which she thrust into his hands with the theatrical flourish of someone presenting a royal decree. "Happy birthday!" "Present." Ryan took the box. Looked at the cover. A photograph of Scrapper was printed on the top, stylized but unmistakable. He raised an eyebrow. Chloe was grinning. "Open it." He opened the box. Inside was a Scrapper figurine. 10 inches tall. Chibi proportioned, with the oversized head and shortened limbs that characterized Japanese-style stylized figures. Despite the exaggerated proportions, the detail work was striking. Every major design feature of Scrapper was accurately reproduced, painted with the care of a collector's item. "I had it custom-made," Chloe said, clearly expecting praise. Ryan tapped her lightly on the top of her head with his knuckle. "You think about fried chicken all day, and then you spend time commissioning a custom figurine of the mech I built. Is that a yes or a no?" "I already have the actual Scrapper, you know. Do I need the figurine?" Chloe's face moved through 3 different emotions in quick succession: proud, wounded, murderous. However, Ryan continued before she could bite him, "It's a great gift. I love it." "You better." "I do." "Humph. Good." She pushed past him into the room and face planted onto his bed. "I'm hungry. Brush your teeth and let's eat." Ryan went to the bathroom, thinking about the figurine. While he brushed, he pulled out his phone and searched for Scrapper merchandise. The results were staggering. Hundreds of listings. Scrapper figurines in every size, every pose, every material. T-shirts. Keychains. Phone cases. Desk models. Life-size stand-ups. Sales counts in the hundreds of thousands for individual listings, across dozens of different sellers. Every single one of them was unlicensed. Ryan didn't own merchandise rights because he hadn't thought to secure them. His legal team, which at the moment consisted of whoever Patricia asked to handle issues, hadn't filed for trademark protection on Scrapper's appearance. The pirate merchandise industry had filled the vacuum with predatory efficiency. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He wasn't motivated by the lost revenue. He didn't care about the money. But allowing unauthorized parties to profit from his work without his involvement was a principal matter. Unless they were generating summon points, which these sellers likely were, making this a gray area, he needed to reassert control over the merchandise. He made a mental note. Future agenda item. He rinsed, spit, and walked out of the bathroom. Chloe was already at the door, impatient for food. They walked to the cafeteria together, Chloe chattering about breakfast options, Ryan letting her talk while he processed the morning. They pushed open the cafeteria doors. Asterisk pop. Pop. Pop asterisk. Confetti. Streamers. A dozen people positioned on either side of the entrance, launching party poppers in perfect unison. Asterisk happy birthday. Asterisk. The entire research facility's population seemed to be packed into the cafeteria. Reeves, Cross, Thornton, the triplet pilots, the kitchen staff, the security detail, the engineers. Even Patricia was there, standing in the back with her arms crossed and a rare small smile on her face. Someone rolled out a cake. 3 tiers, chocolate, with 15 candles on top. Ryan stood in the doorway, genuinely surprised for the first time in months. He'd been so focused on the work that he hadn't noticed the coordination happening around him. These people, who had every reason to treat him as a demanding employer or an abstract authority, had instead planned a birthday party for him. Chloe was grinning beside him. "You knew. I helped coordinate. Patricia roped me in last week." "Thanks, everyone." Ryan called out to the room. "This is unexpected. Make a wish." Someone shouted. Ryan walked to the cake. Looked at 15 small flames. Closed his eyes. He'd wished for a lot of things over the past year and a half. The system had delivered most of them. The ones it hadn't were things no system could deliver: the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself, the trust of people who genuinely believed in him, the warmth of a moment where no one expected him to solve anything. All of those were in the room with him right now. He blew out the candles. Chapter 89, Mutual Leeching. The party was modest. It was also genuine. The cake was cut, distributed, and devoured. People laughed, talked for a few minutes about something other than work, then drifted back to their labs and benches. At a research facility, science was the permanent topic. Birthdays were a rest stop. Ryan and Chloe ended up alone at a corner table. Chloe had a slice of chocolate cake on her plate and a moral dilemma on her face. She'd been training. Cake was not on the meal plan. The drumstick beside the cake, however, had been claimed without hesitation. The hierarchy of her appetites was clear, and cake was below fried chicken. Hypocrite, Ryan said. It's birthday cake. Birthdays are exempt. It's not your birthday. It's a related event. Ryan let her win that one. His phone rang. Tom and Lisa, calling to wish him happy birthday. His mother grabbed the phone first, before Tom could finish his opening greeting, and proceeded to deliver a comprehensive briefing on birthday traditions from approximately 7 different cultures. Eat red eggs for longevity. Eat noodles uncut. Wear something new. Don't wash your hair. Make a wish before any candles are lit. Make another wish after they're blown out. Mom, I'm good. I had cake. There were candles. I wished. I'm fully birthday compliant. Did you eat noodles? I'll eat noodles tonight. Long ones. Long ones. Tom recovered the phone. Ryan, ignore your mother. I sent you a Venmo. Just confirm receipt when you get the chance. Got it. Thanks. 2 things, business related. Mason told me the new ARM prototype is essentially production ready. The video yesterday was the working unit. Yes. Functional spec is locked. Mason will send you the manufacturing drawings tomorrow. Patent strategy. Patricia is handling international filings. She has counsel for both domestic and foreign jurisdictions. Will be covered before launch. Tom exhaled with relief. He'd been mentally preparing to call in favors from his old contacts. The thought of doing IP work as a guy whose previous job was running a barbecue franchise had not appealed to him. With Patricia handling it, he could go back to focusing on operations. Manufacturing strategy. We outsource the mechanical components. Standard prosthetic factories can fabricate the titanium printed parts and the actuator assemblies. The neural interface we keep in-house, but for now, we contract with Aegis Industrial for production. They have the cleanroom infrastructure and the security protocols. Tom hesitated. I don't love depending on them for the most critical component. Ryan tapped the table. Once we're shipping product, I'll apply for a startup loan to build our own neural fabrication facility. Bank financing, not Aegis funding. We keep our independence. Tom nodded into the phone. He'd had several conversations with venture capitalists and bank representatives in recent weeks. They were practically lining up at his door. He'd turned them all down, mostly because the terms were predatory and partly because he wanted to see what Ryan would say before committing to anything. Ryan understood the unspoken concern. He could ask Patricia for a no-interest loan and have it approved within a week. The Aegis system would happily extend Prism Sciences any financial support it requested, given the quality of the underlying technology. But that path made Prism Sciences an Aegis subsidiary in everything but name. Ryan didn't want that. He wanted Prism Sciences to be a real company, competing on its own merits, building its own reputation, surviving or failing on its own decisions. If he used Aegis privileges to crush every domestic obstacle, Prism Sciences would never become globally competitive. It would be a privileged child, propped up by special access, incapable of operating outside of its protected environment. That kind of company didn't last. That kind of company definitely didn't go international. Prism Sciences had to earn its position the hard way, or it didn't deserve the name. Tom understood. After a moment, he pulled up the financial model on his end of the line. With the mechanical components outsourced and the neural interface contracted to Aegis, we have enough runway to ship the first production batch. After that, we're operating on margin. The $100 million from your bonus can fund the contract manufacturing setup and a fitting center in the city. It's tight, but it's workable. A neural fabrication facility was $1.5 billion investment minimum. Chip components had to be sourced externally. The capital intensity was severe. Even with Aegis doing contract manufacturing for them, the per-unit cost on the neural interface alone would run into the high 4 figures. Folding in standard R&D amortization, which Ryan didn't have, but other companies would, the per-unit cost would have been in the low 6 figures. Their pricing advantage was structural and overwhelming. How's Helios doing? Ryan asked. Anything in the news today? Tom had kept the alerts running. Their CEO was on a live stream interview this morning. He said Angel will be in market within 2 months. Ryan blinked. 2 months. 2 months from now. They went from investment to product launch in about 3 months total. That was aggressive. Reckless, even. Real prosthetic launches required extensive clinical validation, regulatory approval, fitter training, supply chain qualification, and post-launch service infrastructure. Compressing that timeline to 3 months meant cutting corners somewhere. Probably everywhere. They're rushing because they want to ride the brand into the next funding round, Tom continued. The CEO's been telegraphing a Series E announcement for months. Angel's launch is the proof point that justifies the new valuation. They need product on the market before the round closes, even if the product is half-baked. Ryan thought about this. The world, he reflected, was a deeply visual place. Neural prosthetics looked futuristic. They smelled like science fiction. They were the perfect optical proof point for a tech company trying to convince investors it was building tomorrow. Helios was using prosthetics the same way Ryan had used Scrapper, as a spectacle that captured attention and converted it into momentum. The difference was that Ryan had used the spectacle to generate summon points. Helios was using it to generate funding round valuation. Ryan glanced at the system display. The progress bar had slowed since the troll farm shutdown. International discussion was sustaining the gain rate, but the domestic surge was tapering. A new spike of attention would help. An idea formed. Dad. If we push hard, can we ship our first units around the same time as Angel's launch? Tom paused. 2 months? It's tight. Possible. Why? Helios has been leeching off my visibility for weeks. Trolls, smear campaigns, narrative capture. They've spent millions trying to position themselves at the center of the neural prosthetics conversation. If we launch on the same day they do, we leech off their visibility right back. Tom started to laugh. They build the stage. We perform on it. They hire the publicist. We get the headline. The press covering Angel's launch will have to cover our launch in the same article, because we'd be the obvious comparison case. Half the audience for their announcement becomes audience for ours, free of charge. You want to crash their party. I want to share their party. Since they came to mine first, it's only fair. What about positioning? They've got $1 billion marketing campaign. Our marketing budget is whatever we have left after manufacturing. That's the point. We don't need a marketing campaign. We need to show up at their event with a better product at 1/10 of the price and let the comparison do the work. We don't need to convince anyone of anything. We just need to be in the same room. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Ryan could practically hear him calculating logistics. It's aggressive. It saves us a year of brand building. What if our product underperforms theirs in the public comparison? It won't. But if it does, we ship a V2 in another 3 months. And if Helios's product is a marketing exercise dressed up as technology, which I'm fairly sure it is, our V1 will outperform their flagship and will permanently capture the narrative they've been trying to buy. Tom thought about it. Mutual leeching, he said. Exactly. It's a good plan. I have my moments. I'll get on it. 2 months. Tight schedule, but workable. I'll tell Mason today. Ryan ended the call. Chloe was watching him with an expression that mixed amusement and respect. You just declared corporate war on $1 billion company, she observed. I declared a launch date. Same thing. Sometimes. She finished her cake without further hypocrisy. Chapter 90, The Mech Expert and the Dome. The first thing Ryan did after his 15th birthday was change his usernames. The handle Ryan Mercer 14 had served its purpose. It was time to retire it. The decision wasn't sentimental. It was strategic. Early in his public visibility, Ryan had wanted his age front and center. The narrative of 14-year-old genius builds a working mech was vastly more powerful than teenage engineer builds a working mech. The age detail amplified the spectacle. It gave the press an irresistible angle. It turned each accomplishment into a viral moment because the implicit comparison with what a 14-year-old should be doing made every result feel impossible. That was the design. But the design had outlived its usefulness. Now that Ryan was internationally famous, his age was no longer an asset. It was becoming an obstacle. Humans, across cultures and throughout history, had been wired to trust elders over youth. Experience, wisdom, judgment, all of these were associated with gray hair and weathered hands. A teenager, no matter how brilliant, triggered a deep-seated bias that whispered, "He's still a kid." The work might be impressive, but trusting him with serious resources would be reckless. This bias was rational on average. Most 15-year-olds shouldn't be trusted with billion-dollar budgets. The bias just happened to be wrong about Ryan, and being right on the average wasn't going to help him. He'd seen the bias play out in the chairman's response to the Crimson Typhoon proposal. If a 60-year-old MIT professor with a long publication record had pitched the same project, $20 billion probably would have been approved without much argument. Even knowing the project couldn't actually deliver Crimson Typhoon for that budget, the professor's institutional standing would have provided the cover for the gamble. The investment community would have rationalized the risk. Faculty colleagues would have written supportive letters. The professor's track record would have absorbed the doubt. Ryan didn't have a track record. He had Scrapper, and Scrapper, while undeniably impressive, was still a single project, not a body of work. The bias was also why Helios's smear campaign had landed at all. Whitfield's beard and decades of credentials were optically reassuring in a way Ryan's youth couldn't match. To a casual observer, the comparison seemed obvious, a respected senior researcher versus an unproven prodigy. The fact that the technology comparison favored Ryan didn't matter, because most viewers weren't equipped to evaluate technology. They evaluated trustworthiness, and trustworthiness was correlated with age. The solution wasn't to wait 20 years for gray hair. The solution was to stop reminding everyone how young he was. Ryan stared at the username change form for a long time, then typed. The mech expert Ryan Mercer. He paused, considering. Then he hit submit. The handle had a layered purpose. Mech expert centered the conversation on his most visible accomplishments rather than his demographics. It implicitly claimed authority based on demonstrated work, not credentials. And it was specific enough to avoid being generic while broad enough to encompass his future projects in adjacent fields. It was, he reflected as he changed the handle across all his accounts, a more mature approach to image management. The old Ryan Mercer would have used something more dramatic. The new Ryan Mercer was beginning to think strategically about the long game. The handle change went viral within minutes. Best username change of the year. He's just declaring himself the world authority on mechs. Bold. I smell something different about this name. Like sunshine. Anyone else? I knew it. Ryan Mercer 15 was already taken. Did you know your old handle has been registered through age 108? Yours sincerely, Ryan Mercer 108. The above commenter is just teleporting in place at this point. Ryan didn't bother reading the responses. He'd predicted the trend, the only question was the magnitude. He went back to studying the Crimson Typhoon damper system. A month passed. The post-launch development of the prosthetic continued. Mason's team built the left arm version using the right arm prototype as a mirror template. The neural fabrication contract with Aegis was finalized. Standard prosthetic factories were vetted for the mechanical components. Patricia's lawyers filed patents in 15 jurisdictions. Tom set up the first fitting center in a leased space downtown, choosing a location with high foot traffic on a major commercial street. The countdown to the simultaneous launch with Helios reached the 4-week mark. Ryan's days settled into a rhythm. Mornings on Crimson Typhoon's damper system, deconstructing the architecture layer by layer. Afternoons on drift training oversight, watching the triplets push their 3-person sync durations from 20 minutes to 30. Evenings reviewing test arm fabrication progress, tracking the 70-ton component as it took shape in the manufacturing facility. Then, one morning, Patricia walked into his quarters with news. The new research center is finished. Operational starting today. Ryan looked up from his laptop. He'd been so absorbed in the damper architecture that he'd lost track of the construction timeline. Already? Let's go see it. I'll bring the team leads. They should familiarize themselves with the new layout. Reeves, Cross, Thornton, and Marsh assembled outside Ryan's quarters. Together they walked the half-mile path to the new facility. The building was visible long before they reached it. Steel-framed, predominantly glass, the structure rose 30 meters at its standard height and 35 at its highest point. From the air, it formed a crescent moon. From the ground, the rolling profile of its roofline resembled an ocean wave caught mid-curl. The polished steel reflected the morning sunlight in long bright sheets, giving the building a futuristic, almost cinematic appearance against the flat coastal landscape. The structure contained 6 mech bays, each 20 meters tall, 20 meters deep, and 30 meters wide, with a hangar door opening on the building's convex face. Behind the mech base sat one larger experimental chamber, 50 meters wide, designed specifically for the Crimson Typhoon arm test. The chamber existed because Ryan had insisted on it during the initial design review, and Patricia had pushed it through the budget approvals. Beyond these large format spaces, 77 mid-sized and small laboratories supported various research groups. A fully integrated facility for an entire research ecosystem. The locals from the nearby town had been watching the construction for weeks. They couldn't enter the controlled zone, but the building's distinctive shape was visible from the surrounding hills. The townspeople had been speculating endlessly about what it was, with theories ranging from satellite ground station to movie set to advanced fish processing plant. Nobody had guessed correctly. Ryan and the team approached the main entrance. The walls of the building rose into clean architectural curves above them, the design more elegant than utilitarian. The aesthetic ambition of the structure was unmistakable. Whoever had designed it had wanted the building to be remembered as much as used. Anyone else feel like we just walked out of a science fiction movie? Cross said. The heavy doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The first thing that greeted them was the experimental chamber, 20 meters tall, 50 meters wide. Suspended steel cables hung from the ceiling. Heavy machinery was arranged along the walls. The empty floor space dominated the eye, vast and silent. This was where the Crimson Typhoon test arm would live. Where it would be assembled, calibrated, and connected to the drift system. Where the first Jaeger-scale neural link experiment would be conducted. The team stood at the threshold, briefly speechless. "This is not a research center," Reeves said finally. "This is a missile silo." "It does feel that way," Marsh agreed. "It feels imposing. In a good way." Patricia turned to Ryan. "The facility doesn't have a name yet." The hint was unsubtle. The new building was Ryan's. He should name it. He looked up at the curve of the roof, the way the structure swept overhead like a frozen wave. He thought about what kind of work would happen inside these walls. Mech construction. Drift research. Weapons development. A facility that would, in the months and years ahead, produce technologies that would reshape multiple industries. The standard nomenclature, Coastal Research Facility B or similar, didn't fit. The building's character demanded something better. Something that captured what it was meant to become. He thought for a moment. Everyone seems to feel this place is more like a base than a research center. So let's not call it a research center. What should we call it? Ryan looked at the curving overhead structure, the way the walls rose to enclose a space that felt protected and ambitious at the same time. Dome base. Patricia nodded. The name fit. It was simple. It was evocative. It implied permanence and scale. It would look good on the official letterhead. Dome base it is. The team filed inside. Chapter 91, Head to Head. The migration to Dome base started immediately. For a full week, the entire facility was a parade of crates and dollies. Equipment, files, sensitive instruments, all of it relocated piece by piece from the old radar station to the new building. The trickiest move was the two mechs themselves, Scrapper and the firefighting prototype. Disassembling them, transporting the components, and reassembling them at Dome base took the technical crew 4 full days of careful work. On the upside, both machines now had their own dedicated bays. No more sharing space. They sat in adjacent hangars with room to breathe and dignity intact. Meanwhile, Ryan and Mason's team finished the prosthetics' final development work. The prototype Mason had built was a right arm. The market needed both arms, obviously, so a left arm version had to be derived. This was straightforward engineering. The left arm was a mirror image of the right with minor symmetry adjustments. A week of work, mostly checking that nothing in the actuator routing assumed handedness. Ryan handled a different challenge, the forearm amputation case. Their existing prototype was designed for above-elbow amputations or full arm replacements. But a substantial fraction of upper limb amputees had lost only the lower portion of their arm. For these patients, a full arm prosthetic was overkill. They needed something simpler, a forearm-only unit with hand and wrist articulation. Ryan designed it in 3 days. He was at the workshop now, watching it run through its paces. Grant was the test subject again. The forearm prosthetic was lighter than the full arm version, with 2 degrees of freedom, finger articulation and wrist rotation. The smaller scope meant fewer signals to map, faster training, and lower power consumption. The fingers and wrist responded to Grant's commands with even better fluidity than the full arm unit. The reduced complexity allowed Ryan's optimized control algorithms to run with more headroom, which translated to faster response times. "This thing is too good," Mason said, watching the demo with mixed admiration and frustration. He'd genuinely thought he understood the project's scope. Ryan handed him a forearm prosthetic out of nowhere a week after announcing he wanted one. It was disorienting. "I'm never going to catch up to him. I've made peace with this." "Status on the battery?" Ryan asked, ignoring the existential complaint. The arm was nearly production ready. The remaining details were small but important. "We sourced the highest capacity prosthetic battery on the market. 45 minutes of continuous operation for the full arm unit. 2 hours under typical daily use." Mason held up a thick rectangular cell. "We modified the battery housing to accommodate the larger pack. The arm is slightly heavier and the housing extends a bit more from the bicep, but it's still well within ergonomic norms." He led Ryan to a display unit. The new full-arm prosthetics bicep section had a flat raised panel that hadn't been there before. "Cover plate. Pop it open and the battery comes out for swap. Users can carry spares and switch on the fly." Ryan inspected it. The runtime wasn't ideal, but it was acceptable for first generation. 2 hours of typical use covered most daily activities. Power users could carry spare batteries. Technical limitations got documented and disclosed honestly. Acceptable. "Put our logo on the cover plate. It's prime visual real estate, and the cover gets seen every time someone changes a battery." "Got it. Send the manufacturing files to my dad." "The forearm version 2, once final testing is done." Mason nodded and went to get the documentation packages ready. 3,000 miles away, Tom was at his desk reading the day's news. The headlines were unmissable. Helios Group's Angel Prosthetics brand enters production. Estimated 300,000 lives will be transformed. January 1st, Helios to host Angel product launch event. Helios announces 20 global cities for initial fitting center network. Science fiction becomes reality, the future of human augmentation arrives. Tom smiled. He'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Helios had finally committed publicly to a launch date and a venue. The marketing machine was firing on all cylinders, telegraphing the announcement weeks in advance to maximize the build-up. By the time January 1st arrived, Angel would be the most anticipated product launch in the consumer technology calendar. That was exactly what Tom needed. He buzzed his communications lead, gave specific instructions, and watched her hurry out of the office with her phone already raised. Within 30 minutes, the Prism Sciences corporate account stirred to life. Despite Ryan's internet visibility, Prism Sciences as a corporate entity had maintained a low profile online. The account was active but careful, posting occasional product updates and avoiding any direct engagement with industry rivals. Despite the modest activity, the account had attracted over 1 million followers, mostly because anything connected to Ryan's name commanded attention. The followers had been waiting for something to happen. The new post arrived without preamble. Prism Sciences is pleased to announce that our first-generation neural prosthetic has reached final development stage. Our flagship fitting center is in advanced preparation. We are planning our first product launch event for January 1st. Stay tuned. Tom reviewed the post, approved it, and watched the responses begin to populate. "Wait. What? January 1st? Same day as Helios? Are you kidding me? This is a direct challenge. They're going head-to-head with a billion-dollar company on the same day. I thought you guys were going to spend a year quietly developing the technology. You're really going to slug it out with Helios on the same calendar date? This is so Ryan Mercer's company. Of course they would. No fear. Let's go. This is going to be the most watched single day in tech industry history." The post racked up shares at a rate that put it on every major platform's trending list within an hour. Tom watched the engagement climb and nodded with quiet satisfaction. The strategy had been planned weeks ago. He'd held the announcement specifically until Helios committed publicly to a date. The moment Helios locked in January 1st, the response landed within a single news cycle. The framing was perfect. Helios had been positioning Angel for months, building anticipation, telegraphing the launch as a flagship moment for the brand. They'd intended to own the news cycle on January 1st, with no significant competing announcements to dilute the coverage. By scheduling the same day, Prism Sciences forced every news outlet covering the Angel launch to mention the Prism Sciences launch in the same article. Helios's marketing department had spent millions creating expectation around the date. Prism Sciences was about to consume a significant fraction of that expectation for free. The trolls had attacked Ryan's reputation for weeks. Tom had absorbed the attacks calmly, knowing that the response wouldn't come until the timing was right. The timing was right now. Helios had spent months leveraging Prism Sciences' visibility to amplify their own. Today, the dynamic flipped. Tom typed a private note to himself: whoever practices long enough at riding someone else's coattails should not be surprised when someone rides theirs. He saved the note. Then he went back to reviewing manufacturing schedules. The 45 days to January 1st had begun. Chapter 92, The Helios Response. The news of Prism Sciences' counter-launch reached Helios headquarters within the hour. Michael Reeve was on a call with one of the firm's senior board members when his executive assistant entered the office. Reeve gestured for the assistant to wait, the phone still pressed to his ear. Funding round timing? We're targeting January 10th, Reeve was saying. 10 days after the Angel launch. We want the brand fully in market before the Series E announcement, so the press cycle has time to absorb the product narrative. A pause as he listened. Are you considering increasing your participation? You'd be welcome. We've worked together for years, this won't be a problem at all. The conversation continued for another minute, then Reeve set the phone down. The assistant approached the desk and placed a printed news article in front of him. Boss. Prism Sciences just publicly counterpositioned. They've announced a launch event on January 1st. Same day as ours. Reeve's first reaction was confusion. They're launching what, exactly? A neural prosthetic. Their Mercer-branded product line. The official statement went up 40 minutes ago. Reeve picked up the printed page. Read it twice. Are they kidding? Do they think they're the Titanic? Volunteering to ram an iceberg. He removed his reading glasses, rubbed his eyes, and stared at the page again. Are these people reckless or do they actually have something? He turned the glasses idly between his fingers. The strategic question was real. Prism Sciences was a sub-million-dollar operation by any conventional metric. Helios had spent more on Angel's marketing budget than Prism Sciences had spent on its entire R&D effort. A direct collision on launch day looked, on paper, suicidal. Unless Prism Sciences knew something that Reeve didn't. He pivoted to the operational question. What's the engagement profile on this story? The marketing question mattered more than the strategic one. Angel's launch wasn't really about selling prosthetics. It was about generating attention, which would translate into valuation uplift at the next funding round. Each engaged viewer was, in Reeve's mental model, worth roughly $1 of investor confidence. Hundreds of millions of viewers translated to a meaningful adjustment to the company's pre-money valuation. It's already passed 10 million views across the major platforms. Mercer's audience trips into the conversation automatically because of the cross-mentions. He has standing readership in every market we care about. Is there any way to suppress this? By the major outlets, get the story killed in the news cycle. Reeve was not interested in sharing his marketing budget with Prism Sciences. He'd built the engagement around Angel using Ryan Mercer's visibility as cheap raw material, sure, but he'd done the work of converting that visibility into a controllable narrative. That conversion had cost Helios close to $10 million in coordinated PR spend. He'd watched a portion of that money disappear into troll farms that abruptly stopped responding to communications. Prism Sciences was now trying to consume the rest of his investment for free. The assistant shrugged. Mercer doesn't operate his own international accounts. All of his international visibility is from fan reposts. There's no central account we can demonetize, no commercial relationship we can disrupt. The only way to suppress the story would be to coordinate with state-level censorship, and that's not something we want to be associated with publicly. The optics would be terrible if it leaked. Reeve nodded. He'd reached the same conclusion before the assistant finished speaking. He lit a cigar, leaned back, and considered. If we can't suppress it, we frame it. Spin them as reckless amateurs picking a fight they can't win. Position Helios as the established player and Prism as the upstart making a publicity stunt. Get the analyst class to run the comparison stories on our terms. The assistant nodded. He'd worked with Reeve long enough to translate the brief into specific actions. Coordinate with the same PR firms they'd used for the troll campaign, brief major business outlets, line up friendly analysts for op-ed placements, prep television talking heads with the desired narrative. The frame would be, Helios is a billion-dollar company with decades of accumulated R&D. Prism Sciences is a startup founded by a teenager. The launch collision was a marketing stunt by an underprepared challenger trying to ride Helios's coattails. I'll have the campaign live within 24 hours. Make sure the international reach is solid. I want this to be the dominant frame in every major market. The assistant left the office. Reeve smoked his cigar in silence for a moment. Then he remembered something Whitfield had told him during their last call: Mercer's prosthetic uses a different technology architecture. Non-invasive cortical signal acquisition. No surgery required. Reeve had filed that information under scientists' anxieties and not given it serious weight. But now, with Prism Sciences openly volunteering for a head-to-head launch, the technical question was rising back to the top of his mind. Was the technology the reason for the confidence? He spent 30 minutes searching for any public information about Prism Sciences' technical approach. Their official site was minimalist. Their PR had been deliberately uninformative. Mercer's social media had teased nothing about the underlying technology. Every video showed the prosthetic in action without explaining how the neural acquisition worked. The lack of information was itself information. Prism Sciences was deliberately holding back the technical details. They wanted the contrast to be a surprise on launch day. Reeve put the cigar down. The unease in his stomach was small but persistent. Like a smoke alarm beeping in another room. Easy to ignore, but not easy to forget. The next day, the counter-narrative campaign went live. Helios's marketing partners executed across every major channel. Domestic TV news. Late-night opinion shows. Tech podcasts. Print media op-eds. Online business commentary. The talking points were aligned across all venues. Established player Helios faces unprepared challenger. Prism Sciences counter-launch viewed as risky publicity move by industry analysts. Will Prism Sciences embarrass itself on January 1 St? Helios's billion-dollar angel product versus teenage startup, the gap may be larger than fans realize. The campaign's reach was significant. Within 36 hours, the framing had penetrated all major demographics across the country. Familiar pundits delivered the talking points with practiced confidence. Bloggers paraphrased the same arguments in slightly different phrasing. Then the international expansion phase kicked in. The domestic coverage was clipped, subtitled, and redistributed across foreign markets. The framing traveled with it. International commentators picked up the narrative and added their own twists, with some particularly enterprising analysts framing the launch collision as a proxy battle between two technological ecosystems. These international takes then re-imported back into the domestic conversation. A second wave of coverage discussed how foreign media was discussing the launch. The recursion generated additional engagement. Within 72 hours, the launch collision had become the dominant story in the global business news cycle. Op-eds. Analysis pieces. Stock market commentary speculating on the implications for Helios's pending Series E. The internet's commenters, predictably, joined the war on both sides. Some praised Helios's establishment credibility. Others mocked the analysts for underestimating Mercer. Still others took the opportunity to argue about general topics that had nothing to do with prosthetics. The familiar pattern of online discourse, applied to a new set of stimuli. In all of this, the unintended beneficiary was Prism Sciences. Ryan had managed to talk Patricia out of intervening. She'd offered to coordinate a counter-narrative through Aegis-friendly outlets, and Ryan had declined. The reason was strategic: this round of attention wasn't focused on him personally. It was focused on Prism Sciences. And Prism Sciences badly needed the international name recognition. Tom, watching the coverage from his office, was downright joyful. Before Helios's campaign launched, Prism Sciences' international name recognition had been minimal. The company existed in a few specialized industry databases and had received occasional mention in coverage of Ryan's projects. Now, in a matter of days, Prism Sciences had become a globally recognized brand. The name was appearing in every major business publication. Every analyst on every continent had an opinion about it. Every investor was now familiar with the company that had dared to challenge Helios. Helios had spent millions of dollars to give Prism Sciences exactly the brand exposure that would normally have required years and a comparable budget to achieve organically. If Tom had tried to buy this level of international visibility through conventional advertising, the cost would have been staggering. Television campaigns in 20 markets. Sponsored content placements. Trade publication advertorials. Conference appearances. Public relations retainers. Tens of millions of dollars, easily, and even then the results would have been incremental. Helios had handed it to him for free. He smiled at his monitor, raised his coffee mug in a private toast to Michael Reeve, and went back to reviewing the manufacturing schedules. 45 days to launch. The fish was in the net. Now he had to make sure the product worked. Chapter 93, Preparations. The car carried Frank Bauer through coastal scenery he didn't recognize, and he still couldn't quite believe what was happening. For 33 years he'd been a prosthetist. Steady job at a state-owned prosthetics facility. Reliable paycheck. Decent retirement on the horizon. The kind of career that ended exactly the way it began, in the same building, with the same colleagues, fitting prosthetics for people who needed them and going home to dinner with his wife. 3 days ago, he'd been on vacation when a young man knocked on his door. The young man identified himself as a representative of Prism Sciences. He was there with an offer, a senior prosthetist position at Prism Sciences' first fitting center. The work would be familiar. Custom socket fabrication, fitting consultation, follow-up care. Same job he'd been doing for 3 decades, just for a different employer. Frank had heard of Prism Sciences. Anyone in prosthetics had. The teenager who'd founded the company was the kind of public figure that even his grandson, who normally cared about nothing besides video games, talked about with genuine awe. But Frank had spent his entire adult life at one institution. Picking up at 60 to join a startup felt absurd. He'd politely declined. The young recruiter, undeterred, had suggested Frank visit Prism Sciences Research Center. Not for the job interview. For a different reason. They had a patient there, an above-the-elbow amputee, who was about to receive his first prosthetic in over a decade. Would Frank consider coming down to fit the socket? Just this one job? Frank had agreed. Travel out, do the fitting, head home. Why not? He'd done thousands of these fittings. One more wouldn't be a hardship. The car turned off the highway and rolled into a small coastal town. Frank looked out at low buildings, salt-weathered storefronts, and a population that skewed elderly. The young people had clearly left for the cities. The town had the worn around the edges character of a place that wasn't dying but wasn't growing either. Why is your research center in a town like this? Frank asked Mason, who was driving. Most R&D operations want urban access for talent and supply chains. Mason kept his eyes on the road but smiled. Honestly, when we first moved out here, we wondered the same thing. But after a while, it stopped mattering. We've got everything we need on site. We focus on the work, not the location. If the work produces good outcomes, the location doesn't matter. It was a more thoughtful answer than Frank had expected. He'd come prepared for marketing speak. This was just a young man explaining his actual experience. Tell me about the patient. Who am I fitting? His name is Daniel Grant. Above elbow amputation on the right side, 10 years ago. He hasn't worn a prosthetic since the original injury. The first one didn't fit well, and he never returned for adjustment. Frank pulled a face. Refitting a patient who hasn't worn a prosthetic in a decade is going to be challenging. The residual limb has reshaped over the years. There's no muscle conditioning. There's likely some skin sensitivity at the contact points. The acclimation period for a new prosthetic could be weeks even with a perfect socket. That's why we wanted you. Your reputation is exactly what this case needs. Frank shook his head with a small laugh. Flattery noted. I'll do my best. The research center was a converted textile workshop. Frank had been expecting something more ambitious. The exterior was unremarkable, the painted sign on the gate a hand-finished job rather than a corporate installation. Frank's first impression, amateur operation. The interior softened that view slightly. The walls had been freshly painted. The space had been laid out with deliberate attention to workflow. The equipment, while modest, was modern. Someone had thought about what they were doing, even if the budget had been limited. But it was still a converted textile workshop. Grant was waiting in the workshop with his son Danny, both of them visibly anxious. Frank introduced himself and shook Grant's hand. Grant's grip was strong and steady, the way a man's grip becomes when his only working hand has been doing all of the work for 10 years. Let's see the prosthetic, Frank said. Mason led him to the workbench. Frank had expected a larger crowd of similar prototypes scattered across the workshop. There were plenty, a row of arms in various states of assembly, looking, in the dim morning light, like a scene from a horror film. Frank had been around prosthetic limbs for 33 years. He didn't find them disturbing. He examined the finished prosthetic that Mason indicated. It was beautiful work. The titanium frame had clean machine-tooled lines. The articulation joints showed precise tolerances. The hand was anatomically proportioned, with each finger showing independent motor housings. The wrist rotated through a full range of motion. The bicep section had a small raised panel, which Mason explained was the battery cover. It's been adjusted to match Mr. Grant's anatomy, Mason said. The forearm and upper arm sections can be telescoped within a few centimeters to fine-tune the length match against his remaining arm. Frank inspected the joint sections. Yes, the design did include modular length adjustment. Smart. Most prosthetic manufacturers built fixed-length arms and required extensive adjustment to socket geometry. This design allowed for socket side compensation and arm side compensation, giving the fitter much more flexibility. He turned to Grant. Let's get you measured. Frank's measurement process was practiced. He took data on the residual limb's circumference at multiple points, the bone position relative to the soft tissue contour, the skin condition, the scar geometry, and a dozen other variables. After 33 years, his hands knew exactly what they were looking for. Within the hour, he had a complete profile and a clear sense of what the socket needed to be. The workshop's manufacturing equipment was set up for resin and silicone casting, both standard prosthetic materials. Frank prepared the socket with the efficiency of someone who'd built thousands of them. By early afternoon, the socket was complete and fitted. Grant slipped it on, with Frank making minor adjustments to the suspension straps that held everything in place. The arm was attached. Mason produced the sensor cap and battery. A soft hum as the system powered up. Frank watched with professional curiosity. He'd seen myoelectric prosthetics in operation. He'd never personally watched a neural-controlled arm in action. Mr. Grant, try the shoulder joint first. Grant was still touching the prosthetic with his other hand, getting used to its presence on his body. At Mason's prompt, he focused. The arm lifted. Grant let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He worked the controls, raising and lowering the arm, rotating the shoulder, flexing the elbow. He was grinning like a child who'd just been handed the toy he'd been asking for since he could speak. Mason brought objects from around the workshop. A water bottle. A coffee cup. A small egg. A brick someone had brought in from outside. Grant picked up each one in succession. The water bottle, smooth grip and lift, no spillage. The coffee cup, clean lift, the handle correctly positioned in his fingers. The egg, too much force, predictably. The egg crushed and yolk dripped onto the workbench. Everyone laughed except Danny, who got a paper towel. The brick, lifted and set down without strain. Frank watched all of this with rising astonishment. He had spent his entire career fitting prosthetics. Even the best myoelectric arms required deliberate effort to operate. The user had to consciously contract specific muscles to generate the right signal. Movement was always slightly delayed, slightly mechanical. The wearer never forgot they were operating a machine. Grant wasn't operating a machine. He was using a hand. The arm responded to his intentions with the immediacy of his own biological limb. The variability in grip strength was clearly volitional rather than fumbled. The egg crushed because Grant was still calibrating his force, not because the prosthetic couldn't grip gently. Frank had watched Ryan's prosthetic videos online. The arm in those videos had moved smoothly. He'd assumed the smoothness was an artifact of careful filming. Apparently not. The prosthetic was actually that responsive in real life. If anything, the in-person experience surpassed the video. This kind of fluidity was outside the curve. Beyond what Frank had known to be possible. Decades of prosthetic engineering had assumed certain physical constraints. This arm was operating on the wrong side of those constraints, and Frank was watching it happen. "May I see your other prosthetic designs?" he asked Mason. Mason was occupied helping Grant test additional movements, but he gestured for one of his team members to give Frank a tour of the workshop. Frank spent the next hour walking through the development pipeline. Forearm prosthetics. Baloney designs and early prototyping. Plans for full leg systems. Each design represented a different application of the same underlying technology, scaled and adapted for specific patient populations. By the time he boarded his train home the next day, Frank was a different man than the one who'd boarded the train south. 33 years. Thousands of fittings. Hundreds of patients whose lives had been changed for the better by a prosthetic, but whose lives had still been constrained by the technology's limits. Patients who had returned year after year saying the same thing, "It's better than nothing, but I miss my hand." The technology Frank had just seen was going to give those patients their hands back. He thought about every patient he'd ever fitted. Every story of frustration and adjustment. Every moment of watching someone learn to live with a tool that approximated, but never replaced, what they'd lost. That was about to change. He took out his phone and called the number on the business card Mason had given him. "I'm in. When do I start?" That morning, Ryan was at his desk, working through the final details of Crimson Typhoon's damper system. The work was nearing completion. Days, maybe a week, until he'd absorbed the full architecture. His phone rang. "Tom. Son. Are you free in a few days?" "Free for what?" "It's almost New Year's Day." Ryan blinked. He'd genuinely lost track of the calendar. The launch was coming up, and somehow he hadn't internalized exactly how soon coming up meant. "You want me at the launch event? You're the technical lead. If you're not there, the team will struggle to handle the technical questions. Mason can speak to manufacturing, I can speak to operations, but the underlying technology needs you." "Fair point. I'll fly out for it." Ryan set down the pen he'd been doodling with and stretched. The damper research could wait a few days. Status on the fitting centers. "Going well. We've recruited senior prosthetists from across the country. Solid team filling out the staff. The flagship center is in a 5-story building downtown. Showroom space, fitting suites, a small auditorium for product demonstrations. Show locations in other cities. Showcase galleries in major shopping centers across 12 cities. Smaller scale presence, but high foot traffic. They'll open the day of the launch. And international. 4 additional showcase galleries in major foreign cities. 1 additional fitting center, full operational, also opening on launch day." Ryan whistled mentally. Tom had been busy. That'll give Helios something to chew on. "That's the idea." Tom paused, then continued. "Cash position is tight. Component manufacturing, 2 fitting centers, 4 showcase galleries internationally, 12 domestic. We have working capital, but the marketing budget is essentially zero." Ryan smiled. "That's fine. Helios is doing our marketing for us. We just need to show up at the launch with a working product. The press will handle the comparison work." Tom laughed. "I figured you'd say that. By the way, those PR firms Helios hired to attack us? One of them has a connection to a friend of mine. He told me everything. They're on a coordinated brief, all reading from the same talking points." "Of course they are. That's how PR firms work. Doesn't make it less amusing." Ryan thought of something. "Dad, I'm going to send you some equipment. Use it in the fitting centers and showcase galleries." "What kind of equipment?" "Holographic projectors. I'll preload them with content. You just need to put them in good visible positions. Make sure the gallery design has space for them. And lean into the science fiction aesthetic. The whole environment should feel like the future." "I had the same idea, actually. Every gallery is being designed with that look." "Don't worry. Of course you did." The call ended. Ryan thought about the holographic display content. Crimson Typhoon's silhouette walking out of the ocean. The plasma cannon firing. The drift system synchronizing. 3 minds becoming one. The technologies that built Prism Sciences, presented in the medium they deserved. He wanted every visitor to a Prism Sciences gallery to walk away thinking they'd just glimpsed the future. Because they had. Chapter 94, Before the Launch. The reporter ate breakfast in his hotel room, then read the news while a half-finished room service tray cooled on the desk beside a stack of crumpled briefing notes on neural prosthetics. His name was Eric Donovan. National Public Broadcasting Network, Science and Technology Desk. He'd been covering tech industry news for 11 years and had developed the kind of weary skepticism that comes from attending too many product launches that promised to change the world and delivered phones with slightly different screens. The Prism Sciences event was scheduled for 1 p.m. It was 11 now. Time to assemble the crew and head to the venue. He pinged the team chat to let everyone know to head down. Then he pulled on his jacket and took the elevator to the lobby. His crew was small. Camera operator Lou Camden, a soft-spoken professional who'd been with NPBN for 15 years. Junior reporter Ava Mitchell, an intern in her final semester of journalism school who Eric had been mentoring. That was the entire team. Tight budget assignment. Eric. Let's go. Ava's enthusiasm filled the lobby like a smell. Eric had stopped being surprised by Ava's energy weeks ago. The intern was a card-carrying Ryan Mercer fan. The moment she'd been assigned to cover the Prism Sciences launch, she'd transformed into a Christmas morning version of herself. Her excitement hadn't dimmed once across 2 days of preparation and travel. Equipment check, Eric said. Cameras, batteries, audio. Anything missing? Lou ran through the inventory in 15 seconds. Everything was accounted for. They climbed into the rental car. Eric drove. Lou, in the passenger seat, was quiet by nature and didn't fill silence unnecessarily. Ava made up for both of them. Most of her chatter was speculation about whether Ryan Mercer would appear at the event in person. I mean, he has to, right? It's their first product launch. He's the technology lead. He's the founder's son. He has to be there. I hope he'll be there, Eric said. If he is, this story goes from product launch to cultural moment in about 30 seconds. The car pulled into the convention center parking garage, and the three of them stepped out. Eric. Long time. Eric turned. Pat Conrad. Veteran tech reporter for a competing network, a heavy-set man with a perpetually amused expression and a hairline that had been losing real estate for a decade. Eric and Pat had crossed paths at every major industry event for the past 8 years. They were friendly rivals. Eric laughed. Skipping the phone launch today. There was a competing event happening on the other side of town. A major smartphone company was launching its annual flagship. The kind of event Pat usually covered. Pat squinted in mock conspiracy. I figured the real news was here. You old fox, same instinct, I assume. Eric chuckled. Pat's crew filed out behind him, 3 people. The 2 networks merged into a 6-person procession heading for the center's main entrance. They followed the signage to the Prism Sciences exhibition hall. The first thing they noticed was the security. A line of uniformed personnel in matte black tactical attire was manning a checkpoint at the hall's entrance. X-ray machines for bags. Metal detector wands. Cross-references against an invitation list. Every attendee was being processed individually. The line was long. Reporters and industry guests were waiting their turn with the patience of people who'd suddenly realized they were not at a typical product launch. This is not standard launch security, Pat muttered. This is airport security, Eric replied. The 2 men exchanged a look. Both of them had been in this business long enough to know that security infrastructure was a tell. The level of protection at an event correlated with the level of importance attached to its contents. Helios's launch was probably running similar security right now. But Helios was a billion-dollar firm. Prism Sciences was a startup. The match in security postures suggested that someone, somewhere, considered Prism Sciences worth protecting at billion-dollar levels. Both reporters mentally adjusted their expectations upward. Eric and his crew worked through the security checkpoint. Bags scanned. IDs verified. Names checked against the invitation manifest. The personnel were polite but efficient. No conversation, no deviation from protocol. Past the checkpoint, the floor plan opened into a long corridor leading to the main hall. The lighting in the corridor was significantly dimmer than the bright convention center lobby. It felt more like a movie theater hallway than a tech event entrance. Eric shrugged it off. Inexperience, probably. Prism Sciences was running its first major launch. Some lighting choices were still being refined. Looks like we hit the jackpot, he said over his shoulder to his team. This level of attention means there's something here worth watching. Ava, you might actually get to see Ryan Mercer in person today. Ava didn't answer. Eric glanced back. Both Lou and Ava were standing motionless, looking past him at something further down the corridor. He turned around. The corridor was lined with glass display cases. They weren't displaying anything physical. Each case contained a pair of small projectors, one mounted at the top and one at the bottom of the glass enclosure. Between the projectors, suspended in the empty space, was a holographic image. The image in front of Eric was a 3-dimensional rendering of a human brain. Soft colors, clear separation between the lobes, subtle anatomical detail visible at the neuron cluster level. The brain rotated slowly on its vertical axis, displaying every angle and turn. The colors shifted gradually as the rotation progressed, highlighting different functional regions in sequence. The image wasn't on a screen. There was no screen. The brain was simply suspended in midair inside the glass case, three-dimensional and stable, visible from every angle as Eric moved his head. Eric stared. He'd been a science and tech reporter for 11 years. He'd covered holographic display technology 3 times. Every time, the demonstration had been a special-purpose installation in an academic lab, with elaborate optical setups, controlled lighting conditions, and image quality that ranged from barely visible to clearly an experimental prototype. The technology existed but had never been productized for non-laboratory use. What he was looking at now was productized. The display case was a self-contained unit. 2 small projectors. 1 brain, suspended in the air, visible to multiple viewers at once with no special viewing equipment. He understood, suddenly, why the corridor was dimmer than normal. The lower ambient light was necessary for the holographic projection to maintain visual clarity. Is this a Pepper's Ghost setup or actual volumetric display? His professional brain was running through the possibilities. Pepper's Ghost effects, using angled glass to reflect a screen's image into apparent space, could approximate this look but with significant viewing angle limitations. Volumetric displays used various techniques to render images in actual physical space and were considered the holy grail of display technology. He'd seen experimental prototypes of both. Neither matched what he was looking at now. The other reporters who'd entered ahead of his team were already crowded around the various display cases, examining the holograms from different angles, looking for hidden screens, checking for projection seams. Pat had used his bulk to muscle a viewing position at one of the more popular displays, pulling his cameraman in beside him. Ava was still frozen. "Let's go," Eric said, grabbing Lou by the arm. "Move." He found a less crowded display and squeezed himself and Lou into front row positions. This case displayed a different image, an exploded technical diagram of a neural prosthetic, showing the layered architecture of the device's signal acquisition, decoding, and motor control systems. A small bronze plaque mounted at the base of the case described each component in plain language. Layperson education, paired with an unmistakably science fiction visual. The technology was sophisticated. The presentation was sophisticated. The combination was overwhelming. Eric looked closely at the prosthetic diagram. He studied it for a full minute, mostly checking the holographic image's resolution at close range. The image quality, on close inspection, was lower than a standard phone display. Individual pixels were visible if Eric looked carefully. The technology had clearly not surpassed traditional displays in raw resolution. But it had completely surpassed every other holographic system on the market in 2 critical dimensions: ambient lighting tolerance, it worked in dim but not pitch-dark conditions, unlike some lab demos, and visual coherence, the image was stable and consistent from all viewing angles, not distorting at edge cases. For a reporter watching the technology evolution of holographic displays, this was a generational leap. Not the final form, but the first form that could plausibly be deployed outside a laboratory. He looked at the projector hardware mounted in the case. Each unit bore a small geometric logo, recognizable to anyone who'd been following the company. Prism Science's angular mech-inspired emblem. The projectors were Prism Science's hardware. Eric mentally added a new headline to his potential coverage: Prism Science's debuts holographic display technology at first product launch. That was a separate story from the prosthetic launch. The prosthetic was the headline. The holographic technology was, somehow, the casual side dish. The fact that Prism Sciences had 2 industry-shifting technologies to showcase, and was relegating one of them to corridor decoration, told Eric something specific about the company's confidence and resource depth. He waited for Lou to capture coverage of the holographic displays, then collected Ava, who had finally regained the ability to walk, and led the team further down the corridor toward the main event hall. The launch hadn't even started yet, and it was already going to be one of the most significant events Eric had covered in his career. Chapter 95, A Different Kind of Launch. The corridor opened into the main event hall. Eric stopped walking. The space was open, bright, and surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that ran along 3 of the 4 walls. At the front, a small raised stage. Spread across the floor, dozens of small round white tables, 4 chairs at each, white porcelain tea service arranged carefully on every table. Beyond the windows, on 3 sides of the building, were carefully maintained gardens. Beds of flowers in winter bloom, evergreen shrubs, ornamental grasses. Sunlight angled through the glass and lit everything with a soft afternoon glow. The faint scent of flowers reached the interior through the climate control system's intake vents. The room felt like an afternoon garden party. Nothing about it suggested a corporate product launch. Eric had attended hundreds of tech industry launches across his career. The standard format was rigid, theater-style auditorium, oversized presentation screen, presenter at a podium clicking through slides, audience seated in cinema rows, applause at the opening, bigger applause when the price was announced, polite applause for everything in between. This space had none of those elements. Invitations, please. A young woman in a Prism Sciences uniform approached the team with a warm smile. Eric produced their invitations. The greeter checked the seat assignments and led the three of them to a designated table near the center of the room. Your table. If you need anything, please find me. She left with the same warm smile she'd arrived with. Ava ran her fingertips along the lacework pattern carved into the back of her chair. White carved chair, white round table, porcelain cups, sugar bowl, cream pitcher. Eric, she whispered. Are we at the right event? The chair, the table setting, the entire ambience was indistinguishable from a high-end afternoon tea service. There was no presentation podium. No projection screen. No technical demonstration setup. Lou took a few establishing shots of the room with his camera, glancing up to count the tables. This is intimate. Maybe 90 to 100 guests total, maximum. The corridor crowd gradually filtered in over the next 10 minutes. Eric watched their reactions with quiet amusement. Every reporter and industry guest experienced the same beat: stop walking, look around, take it in, tilt head slightly, sit down with a confused expression. Pat had the most expressive version of the reaction, his eyebrows climbing his forehead in real time. Servers in white uniforms began circulating, placing small plates of pastries and confections on each table. Teapots followed. Real tea service, leaves brewing in pots with proper timing. This wasn't a launch styled like a tea party. This was a tea party, which apparently doubled as a launch. At the entrance to the room, opposite the stage, a small camera crew was setting up multiple feeds. The launch would be live-streamed across every major platform and on the Prism Sciences corporate site. Ava remembered Eric's earlier comment. You said Ryan Mercer might be here. Have you seen him? He'll appear. Probably. She stood up immediately and scanned the room. Tables were filling steadily. She saw representatives from foreign press outlets she recognized from international tech events. She did not see Ryan Mercer. He's not here. He hasn't arrived yet, Ava. The protagonist doesn't come on stage during the opening titles. Right. Right. I knew that. She sat down. Eric smiled and let his attention drift around the room. Beyond the visible camera operators, a different kind of staff was distributed through the space. Servers, ostensibly. Eric noticed, however, that their attention was directed at the guests rather than at the table service. Each member of the waitstaff was watching specific individuals with the kind of unobtrusive attentiveness that wasn't about silverware logistics. Eric had been around enough security details to recognize the pattern. The waitstaff was cover. The actual service team was probably smaller and more visible. The servers with the watchful eyes were a protective detail integrated into the room's social atmosphere. He chose not to flag this to his team. Lou would have already noticed, professionally trained as he was. Ava wouldn't notice and didn't need to know. Ava pulled out her phone. 12:58. 2 minutes to start. A notification pinged on her phone. An account she followed had gone live. She opened the app. The Prism Sciences official channel was streaming. The view angle came from a camera positioned behind their table, looking forward at the stage. The viewer count climbed in real time. 600,000 viewers within the first minute. 2 million by the end of the second minute. 6 million by the third. And that was just the one platform. There were 5 other major platforms hosting the same live stream simultaneously, plus the corporate site. The combined audience was likely well past 20 million already. The chat feed scrolled too fast to read individual messages, but the general tone was clear. I have all 4 limbs and I have no idea why I'm watching a prosthetic launch this intently. Hoping Ryan Mercer's arm beats the myoelectric standard. Will the mech expert appear in person? Honestly, in the international rankings, this kid is barely top tier. People hype him too much. LOL JK. The pre-event chat was the usual mix of sincere interest, reflexive cynicism, and inside jokes. Standard internet behavior, scaled to 20 million participants. In a different time zone, James Alcott was watching the same live stream from his office at Neuropath Technologies. He was the only person in the building. The rest of his staff had gone home for the New Year's Day holiday, leaving Alcott alone with his monitors and his slowly cooling cup of coffee. He couldn't understand how this had happened. When he'd first heard that Helios was acquiring rights to Whitfield's research and rushing to market, he hadn't panicked. He'd seen the strategic shape of it clearly. If Whitfield's prosthetic launched abroad, the domestic market would seek a comparable benchmark. Neuropath was that benchmark. Or rather, Neuropath could be that benchmark, if Neuropath got to market first. The window was narrow, but it was open. Then Prism Sciences had announced its launch on the same day as Helios. And Neuropath, the company that should have been the domestic leader, was watching from the sidelines because its own technology was still in clinical validation. Alcott had spent 4 years on his prosthetic. He had pioneered targeted muscle reinnervation in the domestic surgical literature. His team had built clean technology. Solid technology. World-class technology, by the standards of his field. And now he was watching a teenager's company go to market with a different architecture, no surgery required, while his own product was at least 6 months from clinical sign-off. Even the consolation prize of domestic leader, international second, was now out of reach. He poured himself a fresh coffee and watched the live stream count climb. In another time zone, 12 hours behind, Michael Reeve was watching from his New York penthouse at 1 a.m. Helios's Angel launch was scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 12 hours from now. Right at the moment when the Prism Sciences launch coverage would have peaked overseas, ridden through European wake-up news cycles, and started landing in American business media. The time zone gap was deliberate. Reeve had insisted on the early Eastern afternoon slot because it caught East Coast business coverage prime time, West Coast morning news, and European prime time evening news with a single broadcast. The optimal slot for global coverage on a single news cycle. 12 hours from now, the Angel launch would be the dominant story. But for the next 12 hours, Prism Sciences launch would be the dominant story. That was the strategic risk Reeve had been chewing on for weeks. By giving Prism Sciences a 12-hour head start, he was letting them set the comparative frame for the day. Whatever Prism Sciences showed first would establish the baseline against which Angel would be measured. If Prism Sciences came in low, sloppy execution, weak product, clear inferiority to Angel's specs, the timing would amplify Helios's superiority. If Prism Sciences came in high, Helios would spend the rest of the news cycle trying to catch up. Reeve had assumed Prism Sciences would come in low. The startup had a fraction of Helios's resources. The product had been developed in a converted textile workshop. The technical lead was a teenager. The assumption was about to be tested. Reeve sipped his coffee and watched the corporate logo rotate on the livestream's pre-event holding screen. The Prism Sciences emblem. Angular, mech-inspired, deliberately distinctive. The smoke alarm in his stomach was beeping again. Slightly louder than before. 12 hours. He'd know by then if his strategy had paid off, or if he'd just handed his competitor a free runway. The launch was about to begin. Chapter 96, Triton 1. A ripple of movement at the front of the hall. Eric turned in time to see a familiar figure emerge from a side door, surrounded by an entourage of senior staff. The room shifted as several hundred heads tracked his entry simultaneously. Ryan Mercer had arrived. Ava made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a squeak. She started to stand. Eric put a hand on her shoulder and pressed her back into her chair. Reporter, not fan. Save it for after. Right. Right. Sorry. The live stream chat exploded. Messages scrolled past faster than the platform could render. Within seconds, the chat feed had effectively turned into a vertical blur of pure motion. Ryan walked through the room with the kind of unhurried stride that came from being the most important person in the room without needing to advertise it. He waved at a few attendees as he passed, exchanged brief nods with several of the foreign reporters, and joined his parents at a reserved table near the front. Mason and Tom were already there. The entire Prism Sciences leadership team was seated together. Ryan settled in. Ava, behind Eric, was vibrating with restrained energy. The clock crossed 1 p.m. The stage lights came up. The presentation screen behind the stage activated. A short film began to play. The opening shot was a young man in a hospital bed. Black and white photography. He was looking at his bandaged shoulder where his right arm should have been. His expression was distant, defeated, the look of someone whose life had ended and whose body hadn't received the message yet. The film followed him through recovery. Through learning to live one-handed. Through the small humiliations of needing help with shoelaces and grocery bags. Through pulling away from friends. Through giving up on activities he'd loved. Through becoming small in his own life. Then the prosthetic arrived. The black and white softened into faded color. The young man received his Prism Sciences arm and started, hesitantly, to use it. Color crept back into the film as he relearned ordinary tasks, making coffee, shaking hands, picking up his phone. Small accomplishments. Small expansions of his world. Then he started using the arm for things he'd given up on. Push UPS in his bedroom. Catching a ball with friends in the park. Playing basketball, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The colors saturated as his world expanded. The film ended on him in a boxing ring. Sweat slicked, fully alive, throwing punches with both arms during a sparring match. The prosthetic moved with the same fluidity as his biological arm. The shot held on his face, present, alive, fully engaged with his life. The music landed on a sustained chord and the screen went dark. The room was silent. Ava was crying quietly, hands over her mouth. She wasn't alone. Several other reporters were dabbing their eyes. Pat had taken his glasses off and was cleaning them with unusual focus. Eric, who'd built his career on professional detachment, was typing fast. Crying was for civilians. He had a story to file. Ryan's mother leaned over and squeezed his shoulder. Go. He nodded, stood, and walked to the side stairs of the stage. He was wearing a long-sleeve shirt with the sleeves casually rolled up to the elbows. Light pants, sneakers, no jacket. The deliberately understated look of someone who could have worn a tailored suit but had chosen not to. He looked, to most observers, like a high school student who had wandered into the wrong room. He stopped at center stage and faced the audience. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here for Prism Science's first product launch event. My name is Ryan Mercer, and I'll be the technical presenter today. The room applauded. The applause was unusual, warm rather than performative, sustained rather than polite. Nobody whistled or shouted, but the volume was significant. The sound of a room full of people who recognized that they were watching something that mattered. Eric pulled Ava back into her chair again. Ryan continued. Quick clarification, the film you just saw was shot live, with a real subject, using our prosthetic. No special effects. I am, on record, terrible at special effects. The room laughed. The reference was to the early skeptics who'd assumed Scrapper's first videos must be CGI. But then a quieter realization rippled through the audience. If the film wasn't special effects, then the prosthetic Prism Sciences was launching today could actually do everything in the film. Everything. Including the boxing. The reporters mentally adjusted upward. Again. Prism Sciences exists to use technology to build a better future. The neural prosthetic is the first product we're delivering toward that mission. We believe technology should give people their lives back. We will keep working until that's the standard, not the exception. The room applauded again. With that, let's get to the actual launch. A staff member wheeled a presentation cart onto the stage. 2 glass display cases sat on the cart, both covered with white cloth. Ryan removed the cloth from the first case. A pair of prosthetic arms. Left and right. Mounted on a stand for visibility. The cameras zoomed. The live stream chat erupted again. The arms were similar to those in the test footage but visibly evolved. The structural lines had been refined for aesthetic appeal. The proportions matched a human arm closely enough that, at a distance, the prosthetic could pass for biological. The most notable difference was the finish. Instead of plain black titanium, the arms had been painted with a dramatic red flame motif. Stylized fire patterns flowed across the bicep and forearm sections, evoking elemental power and motion. This is our first-generation neural prosthetic, Ryan said. The product line is called Triton. He paused. Triton was the messenger of the sea in Greek mythology. He carried a conch shell that could calm or summon storms. He represented the bridge between the depths and the surface, between domains. We named this product line Triton because we believe in the same kind of bridging, between what someone has lost and what they can still become. He paused again. The first generation is named Triton 1. We hope it becomes a second pair of hands, a second body, a second chance for everyone who needs one. The audience absorbed this. Triton 1 has two parts. The arm itself, and the controller. Let me show you the controller. He picked up a wide-brimmed sun hat from a side table on the stage. The audience looked confused. This isn't a fashion choice. This is the controller. He turned the hat over and showed the audience the underside. A complex array of sensor pads was integrated into the inner band. Cables ran from the band to a small processor concealed at the back of the hat. Most neural prosthetics on the market today require surgical preparation. Specifically, they require targeted muscle reinnervation, a procedure where nerves from the amputated limb are transplanted to muscle tissue in the residual limb. The transplanted nerves then produce electrical signals at the skin surface, which a sensor on the residual limb can read. This approach has been the industry standard for over a decade. Triton 1 takes a different approach. Our sensor array reads neural signals directly through the scalp. No surgery required. No nerve transplantation. No medical procedures of any kind. The user puts on the hat, connects to the prosthetic, and the system works. The room was quiet. Eric was typing so fast his keys were producing a continuous percussion noise. Pat had abandoned his note-taking entirely and was just watching. To prove that the technology actually works as described, allow me to demonstrate. Ryan put the hat on his own head. Adjusted it once. Looked toward the prosthetic display case. I have all my limbs. So normally, I have no use for an arm. But the Triton hat doesn't care if you have all your limbs. It reads the neural signal for arm movement and translates it. I'll think about closing my fist. Watch the right arm in the case. He paused for half a second. In the display case, the right Triton 1 arm closed its fingers into a fist. The room made a collective sound that was halfway between a gasp and an inhalation. Eric kept typing. The headline he was drafting read, Prism Sciences launches Triton 1 neural prosthetic, demonstrates non-invasive cortical interface, industry standard threatened by teenage startup. Ryan continued, calmly. Triton 1's signal acquisition speed and resolution are significantly higher than anything currently available. This applies not just to prosthetics. It applies to every brain-computer interface device on the market. He flexed his hand again. The prosthetic flexed in sync, instantly. What you're seeing is the first generation of a new technology category. Surgery is no longer the cost of using a neural prosthetic. The cost of using a neural prosthetic is putting on a hat. The audience finally broke. Real applause. Sustained applause. The kind of applause that happens when an audience realizes they're watching the moment a market gets reshaped. Ryan waited for the room to settle. He hadn't even gotten to the price yet. Chapter 97, Live Demonstration. In his New York penthouse, Michael Reeve dropped his lighter. He'd been about to light a cigar. He'd been watching the live stream. He'd seen Ryan Mercer put on what looked like a sun hat and casually operate a prosthetic arm with no surgical preparation, no electrode array on the limb, nothing but a piece of headwear that the attendees had originally mistaken for a fashion choice. The lighter clattered against the marble floor. Reeve didn't bend to pick it up. He didn't speak any Mandarin. He didn't need to. The visuals were unambiguous. A teenager had walked onto a stage, picked up a hat, and demonstrated a non-invasive neural prosthetic that could be operated by anyone, with no medical procedures, on first wear. He grabbed his phone and called Whitfield. Whitfield was also watching the live stream. He had a graduate student translating in the background. The professor's voice, when he picked up, was unsteady. Michael. Tell me what they just claimed. Whitfield's translator was speaking in his ear. Whitfield relayed, halting through the words like someone explaining their own funeral. He said, they're using a different technology architecture from ours. Non-invasive. No surgery required. The user puts on the controller and the system reads cortical signals directly through the scalp. You said that approach was full of problems. Signal-to-noise ratio. Resolution. Latency. You said that approach was unworkable. Theoretically, those problems exist. They claim they've solved them. A pause. Their stated signal acquisition speed and resolution exceed every published BCI device in the world. Reeve was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question he'd been afraid to ask. Andrew. Why didn't you go after non-invasive cortical decoding when you started your program? Whitfield's voice was small. I assessed both technology paths. I judged that targeted muscle reinnervation was more feasible to productize. I made the conservative engineering choice. You made the wrong choice. Yes. Reeve hung up. He stood in his living room for a long time, looking at the dropped lighter on the floor. 12 hours from now, he was supposed to walk onto a stage and announce a billion-dollar product. The product required surgery. The product cost 10 times what Triton 1 would cost. The product had been positioned as the future of human augmentation. Triton 1 had just become the future of human augmentation. Angel was now the past, before the past had even shipped. He'd known about the technology gap for weeks. Whitfield had warned him. He'd dismissed it as scientists' anxieties. He picked up the lighter and walked to his window. The Manhattan skyline was bright at 1 a.m. Somewhere across the country, on the West Coast, his marketing team was finishing preparations for tomorrow's launch event. Press releases were already in the queue. Analysts had already received their briefing packets. He needed to call his communications lead immediately. He needed to consider whether to proceed with the launch as planned, delay, or reposition. Each option had implications for the Series E funding round. The Series E. The funding round was the actual product. Angel was the marketing prop for the funding round. The funding round depended on Angel being credible. Triton 1 had just made Angel non-credible. Reeves' hands started shaking, just slightly. He picked up the phone and started making calls. In a quieter office across the country, James Alcott was watching the same live stream and feeling something he hadn't expected, relief. He'd been bracing himself for the moment when his last competitive position evaporated. The launch had been the trigger. He'd expected to spiral. Instead, he just sat back and accepted it. It was over. His 4-year program was obsolete. Neuropath would have to pivot. His career as a leader in surgical neural prosthetics was concluding. Whatever came next would not involve the technology he'd dedicated his life to. The relief was strange. The thing he'd been dreading had happened. The dread itself was now gone. He could plan around the new reality. He got up, made himself a fresh cup of coffee, and started thinking about Neuropath's pivot strategy. On stage, Ryan opened the second display case. A pair of forearm-only prosthetics. Same flame pattern paint job as the full arm units. Smaller, lighter, designed for below-elbow amputations. He turned to the audience. I'd like to bring a member of the audience up for a hands-on demonstration. Volunteers. Every hand in the room went up. The forest of arms in front of the cameras was so dense that the livestream chat exploded with comments about the visual. Pick me, pick me. I want to know if it can survive my construction job. Officer, I had an arm in the road. What was I supposed to do? The optimal use case is clearly hauling bricks. 2 arms is 1. 3 arms is none. Don't believe him. Lies. Ryan smiled and pointed to a random table. Table 59. That was Eric's table. Ava lit up like she'd been struck by lightning. She turned to Eric, eyes wide, posture shifting between professional reporter and fan in a cardiac event. Eric hesitated. He genuinely wanted to try the prosthetic himself. He was also aware that this was a moment Ava might never have again. Tom stood up at the family table, microphone in hand. For everyone who didn't get picked, don't worry. After the launch, all attendees will have an opportunity to handle the demonstration units. We've also opened showcase galleries in 12 domestic cities and 4 international locations, all open as of today. Anyone who wants hands-on experience can visit those locations after this event. Eric took the cue. He nodded to Ava. Go. Thank you. Ava nearly tripped over her chair getting to the stage. She wisely chose not to remove her shoes for speed, but the option was clearly considered. She arrived at center stage, face flushed, breathing slightly fast. Ryan handed her a fresh sensor cap. The arm sensor cap was paired to a single user's neural signature. Switching users meant either resetting the unit or using a fresh cap. For the live demonstration, a fresh cap was simpler. Have you ever worn a brain-computer interface before? Ryan asked. No. Put this on. Tell me what you feel. Ava placed the cap on her head and adjusted the fit. She stood for a moment, eyes wide, processing. Then she shook her head. I don't feel anything. That's correct. There's no sensation associated with it. The cap is reading your brain. It isn't writing to it. Try moving your right hand. Ava raised her right hand and made a tentative gesture. A soft mechanical whisper as the prosthetic responded. The right Triton 1 arm in the display case made the same gesture in real time. The audience gasped collectively. Ava stared at the prosthetic. You can try anything now, Ryan continued. Move individual fingers. Make a fist. Bend the elbow. Rotate the wrist. Whatever you'd do with your own arm. Ava experimented. She closed her hand into a fist. The prosthetic closed its hand. She extended one finger. The prosthetic extended one finger. She rotated her wrist. The prosthetic rotated its wrist. The synchronization was instant. No delay. No noticeable processing latency. Her thoughts flowed into the prosthetic's movements as smoothly as into her own arm. Ryan continued narrating for the audience while she explored. Triton 1 has dramatically higher articulation freedom than current myoelectric prosthetics. The standard industry benchmarks for prosthetic degrees of freedom don't capture what this system can do. Independent shoulder motor. Independent elbow motor. Per finger articulation. Wrist rotation. Functionally, anything a biological arm can do. Movement execution speed represents another order of magnitude improvement over current technology. Ava cycled through the forearm prosthetic next. The smaller unit was even more responsive due to its reduced complexity. She closed her eyes for a moment, just feeling the experience of a third arm in the world that responded to her thoughts. When she opened them, she was smiling. This is incredible, she said. Thanks. Take a seat. She returned to her table to a wave of applause. Eric hadn't stopped typing the entire time she'd been on stage. His report was getting longer every minute. Ava sat down, hand pressed to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. How was it? Eric whispered. Eric. I cannot articulate sentences only, please. It felt like the future. Eric wrote that down word for word. Ryan's next guest was Daniel Grant. The audience recognized him immediately. His face had appeared in every Prism Sciences test video. Grant was, in his own quiet way, the third star of Ryan's content, after Ryan himself and Scrapper. He walked onto the stage holding a laptop. The audience caught on immediately. The laptop meant typing. The typing meant something Triton 1 would now demonstrate. Grant set the laptop on a small podium. He sat in the chair beside it. He extended both his biological left arm and his Triton 1 right arm. He opened a text editor, positioned both hands over the keyboard, and started typing. The typing was deliberate but real. Both hands working. The Triton 1 fingers struck individual keys with the same target accuracy as Grant's biological fingers. Grant had been practicing typing for weeks. He wasn't fast, by typist standards, but he was steady. 30 words per minute. Above the threshold for functional employment in most office work. The audience watched in silence. The clatter of the keys was the only sound in the hall. Mason, in the audience, caught his own reflection in the dark side of the camera screen and noticed himself touching his hair. The memory of Ryan announcing this requirement months ago surfaced unbidden. The original target had felt impossible. Now it was happening live, on a stage, in front of 20 million viewers. The text Grant typed wasn't a generic test paragraph. It was a short message. To the people watching this who have ever lost a part of yourself, this is for you. This arm types these words. Tomorrow, it will do other things. The day after, things you haven't tried yet. We're going to have a lot of tomorrows together. Welcome back. He hit return. The text filled the projection screen behind him. The applause this time was different. Some people were standing. Several reporters had stopped typing and were just watching. The live stream chat had stopped scrolling because the comments were arriving slower, with more weight, with people writing actual sentences instead of memes. Grant stood up. He nodded to the audience, awkward in his lack of practice with public attention. Then he walked off the stage. In their living rooms, the people who had been watching with empty sleeves and trouser legs touched fabric that had hung loose for months or years and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the loss was not permanent. The Triton 1 with its red flame motif was no longer a product launch. It was a promise. Chapter 98, Price and Cost. Ryan returned to center stage. Q&A. A male reporter got the first microphone. He had one question. You haven't mentioned the price. What does Triton 1 cost? Prosthetic pricing is never a single number. The final cost depends on the patient's specific needs, the fitting process, the additional services required. That's why we have fitting centers. The full installed price varies. But I can tell you the maximum, under $23,000. The room went quiet. The reporter looked stunned. Did you say 23,000? I said maximum. The actual price for most patients will be lower. He'd done his research before coming. At the upper end of the market, $23,000 bought a mid-tier myoelectric arm. The same money would not get you anywhere near a top-of-the-line model. And here was a neural prosthetic that surpassed everything else on the market in functionality, priced at the level of a mid-tier alternative. The R&D cost alone, in any normal company, would never be recouped at this price point. To clarify, that figure includes installation. The actual hardware is significantly less. Our company isn't trying to maximize revenue from this product. We're trying to maximize how many people we can help. That's consistent with what Prism Sciences was founded to do. Use technology to build a better future. For most companies, that sentence would have been corporate boilerplate. Ryan meant it. The system rewarded him in summon points, not dollars. The technology was, in a real sense, free for him to deploy. The audience couldn't tell the difference between sincere mission alignment and aligned but different incentives. From the outside, it looked like a company so committed to the cause that it was leaving billions of dollars on the table. That was the brand impression Tom had been hoping for, and he'd just received it for free. Beyond direct sales, Ryan continued, we're working with banks on financing programs. Loans, installment plans, third-party medical financing. The goal is to remove every economic barrier between someone who needs a prosthetic and someone who has one. We're also pursuing partnerships with health insurers to integrate Triton 1 into standard coverage. The applause was loud and sustained. Ryan continued through the Q&A. Reporters asked about weight. The arm was heavier than competitors due to the larger battery life, 45 minutes continuous, 2 hours typical, swap packs available, and post-launch support, comprehensive warranty, on-site maintenance through the fitting centers, replacement parts guaranteed for 10 years. Ryan answered each question directly. The honesty was disarming. Most product launches glossed over weaknesses. Ryan stated them and moved on. The first international reporter to receive a microphone was a woman from a major European business publication. She stood up, gave her organization's credentials, and switched to careful English with an accent that suggested she'd recently been working in mainland China. Will Triton 1 be available internationally? At similar prices? Ryan recognized her organization. Their coverage of his work had been balanced and substantive. He answered cordially. Yes. Triton 1 will launch internationally on a rolling basis through our partner networks. Pricing in international markets will reflect import costs, regulatory requirements, and local market conditions. We're targeting parity equivalent pricing wherever possible. And do you consider Helios Group's Angel product a competitive threat to Triton 1? Ryan smiled. That answer will become clear in the next few hours. I think the comparison will speak for itself. The reporter laughed and sat down. The room laughed too. Eric got the next question. He'd been waiting for the right moment. On our way in, the corridor displays were showing what appeared to be true volumetric holographic projections. Stable images in mid-air, ambient light tolerant. Is that also Prism Sciences technology? Ryan had known this question was coming. Yes. Those are Prism Sciences holographic projector units. We've been developing the technology in parallel with the prosthetic work. Today's installation is the first public demonstration. We'll be releasing more details about that product line over the coming months. The hall buzzed with side conversations. The reporters who hadn't yet realized that Prism Sciences was launching a second technology category alongside the prosthetic finally absorbed it. 2 industry-shifting technologies. 1 launch event. The same company, whose technical lead was a 15-year-old. Ryan turned the floor over to Tom, who delivered a closing address that thanked the audience, the team, and the patients who had volunteered to test the prosthetic during development. The launch event ended at exactly 2 o'clock. The applause carried Ryan off stage. The exhibition hall converted to a hands-on demonstration zone within minutes. A dozen Triton 1 demonstration units were arranged on tables for media and guest experience. Sensor caps were available, each one set up with reset protocols so that data from one user could be cleared before the next user took a turn. Reporters lined up to try the prosthetic firsthand. The journalists who had been watching the launch as professional skeptics walked away as believers. Across the country, the showcase galleries that Tom had set up in 12 domestic cities opened their doors at the same moment. Foot traffic, anticipated to be moderate, exceeded all projections within the first hour. Lines began forming outside the galleries within 90 minutes of the launch broadcast ending. The flagship fitting center, scheduled to open at 2 p.m., found itself servicing customers from the moment the doors unlocked. The crowd inside reached capacity within an hour. New arrivals had to wait outside. The international showcase galleries opened with similar reception. The single international fitting center, which Tom had positioned in a major European city, was reportedly oversubscribed before the end of the day. Most of the visitors weren't immediate customers. They were the curious public who had watched the launch livestream and wanted to see the holographic displays in person. They wanted to put their hand on a Triton 1 and feel the materials. They wanted to witness the product, not just observe it through a camera. The galleries had been designed for exactly this experience. Holographic projectors arranged along the walls displayed rotating views of Triton 1 architecture, the brain anatomy and signal acquisition pipeline, and short loops of the promotional film. Lighting was kept low to enhance the projector's visual quality. The combined effect was that every gallery felt like a science fiction museum. The crowd inside made the science fiction effect harder to appreciate. The galleries that had been designed as cathedrals to the future were operating like high-end farmers' markets. Ryan and the team left the convention center after the demonstration period and drove to the flagship fitting center. The crowding was even worse here. The fitting center's first 3 floors, the customer-facing floors, were packed. People were lined up to consult with prosthetists about fittings, to watch the demonstration units in operation, to handle the materials. Frank Bauer and the other senior prosthetists Tom had recruited were running consultations as fast as they could process them. The schedule for the rest of the week was already filling up. The schedule for next week was filling up. The schedule for the month was filling up. Mason and the rest of the engineering team observed the lobby crowd from the upper floor mezzanine. Below them, dozens of patients and their families were learning about the technology. Some of them were tearing up while looking at the demonstration units. Some were asking questions about specific medical conditions. Some were just holding the materials and feeling, for the first time, that the future might actually arrive in their lifetime. Mason had been an engineer his entire adult life. He'd built things that worked. He'd never built something where the people who needed it cried when they saw it. He went into the corner of the mezzanine and rubbed his eyes for a minute. Then he came back out and got back to work. Ryan, Tom, Lisa, and Mason adjourned to a small conference room on the 5th floor. Tom pulled up the financial projections on his laptop. Per unit profit, after manufacturing and amortized R&D, is somewhere between $800 and $1,200 depending on configuration. That's reasonable margin for a mass-market product but very thin compared to Helios's pricing model. If launch demand holds at current levels, we'll be cash flow positive within 90 days and able to fund expansion into other product lines. I want to grow the prosthetics R&D group, build out lower limb prosthetics, and expand into orthotic devices. Good plan. Beyond direct sales, we can license the technology to fitting centers internationally. Supply them the Triton 1 hardware, let them handle local installation and service. We collect the manufacturing margin without operating the retail footprint. I have friends in 3 different countries already starting initial conversations. Tom seemed to know somebody everywhere. Ryan had stopped trying to track the social network. Run with it. Triton 1's actual hardware cost was relatively low, standard mass-produced components for the structural elements, mid-cost motor systems, and the proprietary neural processing module which was the most expensive single piece. Total bill of materials hovered around $10,000 for the most complex full-arm version. As production scaled, that number would drop further. Adding labor, distribution, and warranty service brought the all-in cost to somewhere around $11,000 to $13,000 per unit. The retail price of $23,000 was thus generating a meaningful margin. Not enormous, but real. Crucially, Ryan's R&D cost was effectively zero. Most companies would have folded several $100,000 per unit into the price to recoup their development investment. Prism Sciences didn't have that overhead. Their pricing was structurally lower than any competitor could match without operating at a loss. What about the holographic projectors? Tom asked. Do you want to develop that as a separate product line? Ryan thought about it. Not yet. Let's get prosthetics established first. The patents are in our portfolio. The technology isn't going anywhere. Once we're stable in this market, we can think about expansion. There's no rush. Agreed. The meeting wrapped. The Mercer family went out for dinner. Mason went back to his team to coordinate next steps. The first day of Triton 1 was over. The second day would be Helios's launch day. 12 hours from now. Chapter 99, Domestic and International. The articles started appearing online before Ryan had finished dinner. Some were filed by reporters who had attended the launch in person. Others were from journalists who had interviewed civilians outside the showcase galleries. A few had attempted to reach the flagship fitting center, found it impossible to enter due to the crowd, and filed dispatches from the sidewalk. Eric Donovan's piece for NPBN was the standout. His headline, Prism Sciences Triton 1 launch, glimpsing the future we've been waiting for. Eric had done the work. The article walked through every claim made at the launch event and verified them against industry baselines. It included a long-form profile of Daniel Grant and his story of regaining function after a decade without a prosthetic. It dedicated 3 paragraphs to the price comparison, with a chart showing Triton 1's $23,000 ceiling against industry standard pricing for full-arm prosthetics. The chart made the financial argument unmistakable. Eric openly speculated that Prism Sciences could not be recouping its R&D costs at this price point. He was the first reporter to publicly raise the question, and several other outlets immediately picked up the framing. He compared the technology architectures directly, Triton 1's non-invasive cortical signal acquisition versus the targeted muscle reinnervation approach used by Helios's Angel and Neuropath's domestic offering. The conclusion landed without ambiguity: the surgical approach was about to be obsolete. The article closed with a paragraph on the holographic projector technology, noting that Prism Sciences had quietly debuted a second industry-shifting capability as corridor decoration. Eric's framing: Prism Sciences appears to have multiple game-changing technologies in its portfolio. Today's launch is the first product. The pace at which the company chooses to release the others will define the next decade of consumer technology. Pat Conrad's competing piece took a similar angle but with more business press flavor. The two articles together set the framing for the entire post-launch news cycle. James Alcott read Eric's article in the morning and felt the chill set in fully. Until last night, he'd been holding on to the slim hope that Triton 1 would have functional weaknesses that would emerge under scrutiny. Sloppy execution. Inconsistent performance. Real-world reliability problems that didn't show up in a controlled launch demo. Eric's article had drained that hope away. The reporting was thorough. The technology comparisons were grounded. The product was real, and it was going to consume the entire market. Alcott's Neuropath had spent 4 years and several $100 million building a prosthetic that was now positioning to be a second-tier product in a market dominated by a converted textile workshop startup. The company that should have been the domestic benchmark had been demoted to an asterisk. He could have wallowed. Instead, he opened a blank document and started drafting a pivot strategy. Neuropath had assets that Triton 1 didn't directly compete with: medical relationships, surgical training programs, regulatory approvals already underway. Maybe Neuropath could refocus on the patients who would still be candidates for surgical prosthetics, those for whom Triton 1's non-invasive approach didn't work due to specific neurological conditions. A niche, but a real one. Or Neuropath could try to license Triton 1's underlying technology and become a Prism Sciences distributor. Or Neuropath could pivot entirely. Surgical robotics. Rehabilitation devices. Brain-computer interfaces for non-prosthetic applications. The team had real expertise. The technology had alternative applications. Alcott sketched the options. Each had risks. None of them involved leading the prosthetics market. He'd lost that opportunity permanently. He saved the document and went to make breakfast. The crisis was permanent. The response started today. In Manhattan, Michael Reeve was already at his office. His communications team had been assembled at 3 a.m. The Angel launch was scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern. 10 hours away. Reeve had spent the past several hours doing what he always did when his strategy collapsed: rebuilding it from the ground up. The original Angel positioning was no longer viable. Triton 1 had captured every selling point Helios had been planning to highlight. Cutting-edge technology, Triton 1 was demonstrably ahead. Future of human augmentation, Triton 1 had already demonstrated the future. Compassionate accessibility, Triton 1 had priced itself at a tenth of Angel's expected retail. Stylish design, Triton 1's red flame motif and visible craftsmanship had photographed beautifully. Helios had built a billion-dollar marketing campaign on talking points that no longer applied. Reeve was sitting at the head of the conference table at 4 a.m., looking at his communications director, Karen Schmidt. What can we credibly emphasize that Triton 1 can't? Karen had been thinking about this since 2 a.m. 3 things. Premium materials and craftsmanship. Surgical integration. Established medical partnerships. Premium materials. Triton 1 looks fine. Are we genuinely better? We use medical-grade materials throughout. Triton 1 uses titanium and standard polymers. We can credibly claim a more durable, longer-lasting product. Will the audience care? Karen's silence was the answer. The audience cared about whether the product worked, not what it was made of. Surgical integration. The pitch is what, exactly? Our product requires surgery and theirs doesn't. We can frame surgery as commitment. As a serious medical procedure for patients who want the best possible outcome. The cap is convenient. Surgery is medicine. Reeve thought about it. That's spin. It's the only frame that turns our weakness into a strength. It also makes us sound condescending. Our product is better because it's harder to use. That's not a winning message. The mass market is going to choose the easier option. Karen sighed. Then we focus on premium positioning. We position Angel as the high-end choice for patients who want the most advanced surgical-grade option, while acknowledging Triton 1 as a budget alternative. We accept that we're not the volume leader and that we capture a smaller, higher-margin market segment. That changes the entire investor pitch for the Series E. The funding round was predicated on Angel being the dominant brand. If we reposition as a niche premium product, the valuation premium evaporates. Yes. The room was quiet. Reeve looked at his cigar. He hadn't lit one yet today. The taste was wrong. Get me the partners on the line. We need to discuss whether to delay the Series E. Karen stood up and walked to the phone bank. The launch was still happening. The product would still ship. But the ambition behind the launch, the financial event Helios had been building toward for 2 years, was now being recalibrated in real time. The cigar stayed in its case. Across town, near Times Square, the Prism Sciences Showcase Gallery was packed at midnight. The gallery had opened the moment the domestic launch ended, accommodating the time zone difference. Holographic projectors weren't operating yet, since those units were limited to a domestic market debut, but the demonstration prosthetics and full product information were available. NYPD officers stood at the entrance maintaining the queue, which extended around the block. Inside, a Prism Sciences demonstration coordinator named Andy was managing the line. Demonstration starting now. Please form a single line. A teenager stood at the front of the queue. 15 years old, by Andy's estimation. He was looking at the suspended Triton 1 forearm prosthetic with an expression Andy had seen many times in his short career as a Prism Sciences employee: hunger. The teenager's mother stood beside him. Andy noticed that the boy's left forearm was held stiffly, unnaturally, and that he wore a glove on his left hand. Left forearm, Andy said. Forearm prosthetic, then. The boy nodded. Andy rolled the forearm Triton 1 over to the demonstration station and adjusted the connection. The boy put on the sensor cap, hands trembling slightly. Take your time. The signal acquisition takes a few moments to lock. Think about moving your left hand, any motion at all. The boy stared at the prosthetic. Andy watched him. The mother watched him. The crowd around the demonstration station went quiet, which was unusual for a midnight gallery in Manhattan. The Triton 1 fingers twitched. Then closed. Then opened again. The prosthetic responded to the boy's neural signals with the same fluidity it had shown for every other user. The boy's eyes widened. It works. It works. He was speaking quietly, like he was afraid that saying it loudly would make it stop. Phones around the demonstration station were already recording. Can I get one? The boy asked Andy. Today? Right now? Andy shook his head gently. The fitting center isn't open in this market yet. Triton 1 ships through certified fitting centers, and we're still building the local center. It should open within the next few weeks. Once it does, you'll be able to schedule a fitting. There's no wait list for individual orders, just the regulatory and licensing process. The boy's face fell briefly. Then it brightened again. A few weeks. A few weeks. That's nothing. I've been waiting 9 years. The crowd around the demonstration station applauded. Phone footage of the moment was uploaded to multiple platforms within minutes. The video, which featured a teenager controlling a Triton 1 prosthetic for the first time, became the most viewed clip of the night across major social platforms. Comment threads exploded with reactions. Why doesn't my city have a Prism Sciences gallery? I want to feel what it's like to control a robot arm with my mind. Only a god could create technology like this. I'm starting to feel sorry for Helios. Their angel might be no match for the three-headed, six-armed mythological figure. If you're not crying watching this kid, you don't have a soul. 12 hours until the Helios launch. Half of me wants to watch it burn. The other half doesn't want to make this kid wait 3 weeks for his arm because Helios sucked all the air out of the room. The Prism Sciences logo on the gallery's window glowed softly through the late-night New York air. The line outside the gallery hadn't shortened. People had started bringing folding chairs. The day was over for the company that had launched. The day was just starting for the company that had been launched against. 12 hours. Chapter 100, First Victory. The launch was a comprehensive success. By the time the fitting center closed for the night, more than 2,000 visitors had passed through. Every corner of the building had hosted a person, a conversation, a question. The 5-story building had been operating at full capacity for 12 consecutive hours. The showcase galleries had moved more volume. Across 12 domestic cities, total visitor count cleared 100,000 by end of day. Mall traffic at the gallery locations spiked to numbers that mall managers compared to Black Friday levels. Many visitors weren't candidates for prosthetics at all. They were curious civilians who had watched the live stream and wanted to see the technology in person. That was the secret of Triton 1's market reception. The product's target audience was people who needed prosthetics. The product's actual audience was anyone who had ever fantasized about controlling a robot arm with their mind. Cybernetics fantasies had been part of popular culture for decades. Triton 1 was the first product that delivered on the fantasy. The result was that the prosthetic broke out of its niche and became a mainstream cultural moment. Online engagement reflected the broader interest. The launch was the dominant story across every major platform. Television coverage was extensive. NPBN's Evening News led with Eric Donovan's coverage, integrating his footage and analysis into the network's flagship broadcast. Other networks followed with their own variations on the theme. The same television program that had hosted Alkit weeks earlier reached out to invite him for another segment. Alkit declined. He was busy. He was on the phone with Neuropath's investors trying to keep them from triggering breach of contract clauses. Neuropath's investors had committed real money to a company whose competitive position had just been obliterated. They wanted explanations. They wanted reassurances. Some of them wanted out. Alkit spent the entire afternoon and evening on calls trying to keep the company's funding intact. Eventually he carved out time in the late evening to watch Helios's launch. Helios's Angel launch event began at 1 p.m. Eastern. Reeve was on stage, addressing an auditorium-style theater filled with reporters and industry analysts. The lighting was theatrical, dimmed house, bright stage spotlights, presentation screen behind him glowing. The format was the conventional product launch theater that Reeve had originally chosen as a power statement. The contrast with Triton 1's Tea Party launch could not have been starker. Whitfield joined Reeve on stage to discuss the technical aspects. The professor's enthusiasm was visibly forced. His voice carried the determined flatness of someone reciting prepared remarks. The Angel product had legitimate features. The most genuinely impressive was tactile feedback. Microscopic sensors integrated into the prosthetic's fingertips relayed pressure, temperature, and texture data through the surgically transplanted nerves to the user's somatosensory cortex. Users with Angel could feel objects they touched. The sensation wasn't biological equivalent, but it was real and useful. Reeve and Whitfield emphasized this feature throughout the presentation. Tactile feedback was Angel's strongest single advantage over Triton 1. The pitch was that Angel was not just a prosthetic, it was a return of sensation, a more complete restoration of the lost limbs function. The argument was real. The audience could see why it mattered. But there were problems. Angel was heavier than Triton 1. It used more power and had shorter battery life. Its cosmetic appearance, while polished, lacked Triton 1's distinctive visual signature. And it required surgery. Then a reporter asked the price question. Reeve had not wanted to disclose the price. He'd hoped to defer the conversation to private consultation. But the reporters pushed. He couldn't avoid it without making the avoidance itself a story. The starting price for Angel, he said, is approximately $80,000. Final pricing depends on the patient's specific configuration and surgical requirements. The audience reaction was visible. $80,000. Almost 3.5 times Triton 1's maximum. And Reeve had used the word starting, which meant most patients would pay more. Several reporters wrote the price down without further questions. The headline would be the price. The launch was, in effect, over. Across the country, Tom and Ryan watched Helios's launch from the family living room. When tactile feedback was demonstrated, Tom's expression tightened. The capability was a real advantage. If Angel could deliver a return of touch, that might preserve a market segment for the surgical approach. Then Reeve disclosed the price. Tom's expression relaxed completely. We're fine. $80,000 was simply too much. Even in premium markets, the audience for an $80,000 prosthetic was orders of magnitude smaller than the audience for a $23,000 prosthetic. The tactile feedback advantage was real, but it wasn't a multiple of 3.5 advantage. Helios was effectively withdrawing from the mass market by pricing. Ryan didn't really care about the launch. He was watching his system display. Project 2, 89%. 800 million people had heard the words Triton 1 or Mercer in the past 24 hours. The summon points were arriving at an unprecedented rate. The progress bar was climbing toward completion fast enough that he could practically watch it move. The doorbell rang. The visitor was Eric Hudson, the operations lead Tom had hired to run the flagship fitting center. Hudson was 40, formerly the manager of a state-owned prosthetics facility, with 2 decades of operational experience in the industry. Tom had recruited him personally. He carried a leather portfolio and looked exhausted. Hudson came in, exchanged greetings, glanced briefly at the security setup he'd had to clear at the front gate, and sat down across from Tom and Ryan. Mr. Mercer. I came to give you the Day 1 operations report. The fitting center just closed. I was about to call you, Tom said, muting the Helios broadcast. Walk us through the numbers. Hudson opened his portfolio and produced a printed report. Tom flipped through the data. 37 prosthetists active today. Average of approximately 70 patient consultations per fitter. Total firm orders confirmed, 133. Most of the remaining consultations were patients who indicated interest but wanted to think about it or were waiting on financing approval. Those numbers are exceptional, Tom said. I'm proud of the team. Make sure the fitters know that. The socket fabrication is the most patient-impacting part of the install. They need to take pride in the quality of that work. Frank Bauer is leading the technique training. He's making sure every fitter is up to his standards. Ryan picked up a copy of the report and scanned the totals. 133 confirmed orders. Average install price hovering around $15,000, well below the $23,000 maximum. Total Day 1 revenue, approximately $2 million. This had probably tapped the pent-up demand from the immediate launch crowd. Future order flow would stabilize at a lower rate as the market saturated and patients took longer to make decisions. But the Day 1 number established the baseline. How are the international preparations? Hudson had been managing that work stream too. I retained a regulatory consulting firm to handle the international filings. The process has been straightforward so far, no obstacles. I expect our first international fitting center to open in mid-January. Decent timeline, Ryan said. Even with the delay, Triton 1 would reach international markets before Helios's surgical alternative could displace the comparative narrative. The mass market positioning would hold. The three of them discussed expansion plans for another 30 minutes. Hudson outlined the staffing and operational requirements for international rollout. Tom discussed financing options for facility expansion. Ryan listened more than he talked. The operational details were Tom's domain. He'd hired good people for a reason. Around 2:30 in the morning, Hudson left to get some sleep. Tom and Lisa headed to bed soon after. The Helios broadcast was wrapping up on the television, its anchor speaking with the deliberate tone of a presenter trying to manage a launch that hadn't gone according to plan. Ryan stayed up a little longer, reading through Hudson's report and thinking. Triton 1 was launched. The market position was secured. The international rollout was on track. Tom had the operations under control. The company would handle itself for the next several weeks without daily input from Ryan. Which meant Ryan could go back to the work that had been waiting for him. He stretched, packed a bag, and booked a flight back to the coast for the next morning. There was a 70-ton arm waiting for him at Dome Base, and he was eager to start putting it together. Chapter 101, The Right Arm. The morning after Ryan returned to the coast, Patricia escorted him to Dome Base. The facility was fully operational now. The old radar station had been reduced to staff residential quarters, while every active research workstream had been relocated to Dome Base. They stopped at the main gate on the building's concave side. The door was massive. 30 meters wide, 20-some meters tall, paneled in matte black industrial coating. A human standing in front of it looked like a black-suited insect against the wall of a warehouse. The door wasn't designed for daily use. The smaller side doors handled normal foot traffic. The main door opened only for testing operations. Researchers had been speculating about what the main door's chamber contained ever since the building came online. Theories ranged from a larger mech to an industrial test rig to a really big aquarium that someone thought was a good idea. Today, the speculation would be answered. Patricia produced a key and unlocked the personnel door inset into the main panel. She pushed it open. The room inside was dark. Light from the doorway cast a long rectangle into the chamber, illuminating dust particles drifting through the air. Beyond the dust-filled cone of light, several massive shapes were visible at the edge of darkness, like hills sitting in deep fog. Per the blueprints you submitted, this thing took 2 months of crash production. It arrived yesterday. The technical crew is standing by for your assembly directive. Patricia activated her phone's flashlight and worked her way along the wall until she found the room's lighting panel. Ceiling lights came on one bank at a time. Ryan looked up. The thing he'd designed on a screen was now physically present in front of him, and the scale of it forced a recalibration. He'd built Scrapper, lived alongside Scrapper, sat inside Scrapper's cockpit. He'd thought he'd developed an intuition for mech proportions. The right arm of Crimson Typhoon, even disassembled, made Scrapper look like a hand tool. The arm was in 3 sections, separated for transport. Upper arm and elbow, forearm, hand. Each of these subsections, individually, was larger than Scrapper's entire body. The upper arm sat on its transport cradle like a felled tree, 12 meters long, its segmented joint structure visible. The forearm rested on a separate cradle with the same massive scale. The hand, the smallest of the 3 sections, was about the size of a passenger sedan. Around the 3 primary subsections were dozens of smaller components arranged in organized clusters: the diesel piston engines, the integrated neural connection modules, the red-painted titanium alloy armor plates, structural brackets, hydraulic actuators, and an absurd quantity of fasteners. The smallest fasteners on the floor were as thick as a human arm. The components had been delivered disassembled to facilitate transport. The technical crew would now begin the assembly process at Dome Base, working from the master diagrams Ryan had prepared during the design phase. Ryan stood looking at the components for several minutes. "This room," he said finally, "is now the Storm Bay." Patricia nodded. "Storm Bay? Whatever you want to call it. The components have been inventoried and verified. Assembly can start as soon as you authorize it." She looked up at the disassembled arm, then back at Ryan with an amused expression. When this order went to the manufacturing facilities, the engineers there were genuinely confused. They couldn't figure out what it was for. Several of them privately questioned whether the design was even fabriceable at scale. The lead engineer asked me twice if we were sure about the load specifications. I had to explain that yes, we were sure. Ryan smiled. He could imagine the conversations on the manufacturing floor. "Tell the technical crew to begin assembly immediately. They have the complete blueprints already." "On it." Patricia stepped aside to make calls. Ryan walked around the components, examining the workmanship. The fabrication quality was exceptional. The titanium armor plates had the precise color saturation he'd specified. The structural welds were clean and consistent. The hydraulic line routing was exactly as drawn. The manufacturing partners had taken the work seriously despite their initial confusion. He passed through a side door and entered the main building. The Drift Research Lab was on the upper floor, behind 2 layers of security. Ryan's fingerprint and iris scan unlocked the secured door. The post-relocation security upgrades had pushed the access controls to a higher level than even Scrapper's original lab had used. Inside, the lab was busy. Reeves and Cross were at the monitoring station. The other senior researchers were scattered across their respective workstations. In the center of the room, the Petersons sat in the drift apparatus with their sensor caps on. The connection was active. Ryan approached the monitoring station quietly, careful not to disturb the active session. Status. Reeves looked up. Average 3-person sync duration is now over 90 minutes. Significant improvement since the last review. Ryan checked the display. The current connection had been running for 100 minutes. Sync strength had degraded to 32%, well below operational threshold. The pilots could maintain a connection for 90+ minutes, but only the first hour or so was useful for actual mech operation. The remaining time was diminishing returns as neural fatigue set in. 90 minutes wasn't enough to operate Crimson Typhoon. The Jaeger would need pilots who could sustain high sync connections for several hours of continuous operation. That was still ahead. But 90 minutes was enough for arm testing. The test arm wouldn't require sustained operation, just demonstration of 3-person neural control of a Jaeger scale system. Even a 30-minute high sync window would be sufficient for the test protocols Ryan had in mind. He pulled Reeves aside. How are the 5 elite labs progressing on the assignments I gave them? Reeves had been technically responsible for those research groups since they were absorbed into the operation, though Ryan hadn't followed up regularly. 5 elite university research groups had been recruited from a national neuroscience consortium and put to work on specific sub-problems related to mech-scale neural interfacing. Each lab had received a focused research mandate from Ryan and then been left to operate independently under Reeves's general supervision. Ryan felt a brief twinge of guilt. He'd given those labs research mandates and then forgotten about them for 6 months. The fact that the labs had continued to do useful work without his daily involvement suggested either that the mandates had been clear or that Reeves had been doing more management than Ryan realized. Reeves consulted a mental file. Labs 1 and 2 are working on neural connection persistence and stability. They're close to meeting the original mandate. They ran a validation test on Scrapper yesterday. Results were positive. And the other 3? Labs 3, 4, and 5 are developing operating system architecture and AI augmentation for the human-machine interface. They've been preparing for a validation test on the firefighting mech. That should happen in the next week or 2. How close are they to deliverable? All 5 labs are within 2 to 3 weeks of completing their mandates. They've been disciplined about staying on the framework you provided. The work has been mostly applied development rather than novel research, which is why the timeline has been predictable. Ryan nodded. The labs had effectively been doing engineering tasks framed as research. The university affiliations had been useful for talent acquisition and for plausible cover, but the actual work had been Ryan's design specifications being implemented by skilled hands. The arrangement had served its purpose. Let's go see what they have. The 2 of them left the drift lab and walked toward the wing where the elite labs were housed. If the labs were on track to deliver in 2 to 3 weeks, the timing aligned perfectly with the test arm assembly. By the time the arm was physically complete, the supporting software systems would be ready for integration testing. The pieces were converging. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Then a Jaeger scale arm would move under 3-person neural control for the first time in history. The biggest unknown in the entire Crimson Typhoon program would be answered. And after that, the only thing left would be construction.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.